that when you do ethics, it has to be continuous with everyday decision making, with the kind of thinking that you employ when you make your own decisions. Now, if you're in a classroom where, if you ask the students, how do you go about making choices? And some of the students may answer that, well, I think about karma, or my parents raised me in a Confucian way. Then it simply doesn't seem that teaching Mill and Kant is a way of teaching them ways of ethical thinking that are continuous with something that is recognizable from their own daily lives. But that is exactly what is needed, and we need the students to become people who, like us in a way, can build these bridges. The students often have to traverse cultures in their own lives in one and the same day because they live, for example, at Columbia College, but also in their families. And that may involve traversing two different conceptual frameworks. So they need to learn the very skills that we are interested in, namely how you, as it were, find common ground in spite of difference. And that has become, I think, one of the core challenges for ethics. Now, a few words on artificial intelligence and how that relates to these issues of different cultural systems, different value frameworks, and so on. One of the, that is also a topic dear to me at my heart because I'm one of the co-founders of an initiative that is called the Values Lab, where our aim is to put computer scientists in conversation with philosophers, with lawyers, with people who make regulations and policy related to artificial intelligence. Now, one of the biggest challenges in this context is called value alignment. Value alignment is the idea of aligning artificial intelligence models with values. But now you are thinking about different cultures, different frameworks, and so on, and your first question is going to be, with which values? Which whose values? Are we going to align values? What are the, as they call it, target values for AI value alignment? Because people disagree about values. And I want to just, as it were, speak up as a philosopher about the urgency of this challenge. There are currently, as far as I can see, two approaches, and both of them are sort of truly unsatisfactory. One is that people, those who develop artificial intelligence sometimes say, well, let's ask a specialist, let's ask an ethicist. Why shouldn't the ethicist, write up 10 principles and we then somehow program it into the AI? Now, that is not going to happen. As much as I want to praise philosophy, that is not going to happen. And why? Because philosophers disagree amongst each other just as much as other people. So any kind of decent philosopher would say that that is dogmatism if you were just to write up your own favorite 10 principles. That's not going to happen. The other major approach is to say, well, maybe we can program something where the AI model is going to give you an answer that is a fit for your outlook. You can immediately see what the problem is here. That is the ultimate echo chamber. That is only making things like so much worse. And what about a situation where someone who has a horrible evaluative outlook inserts the prompt? Is that person going to get also something that is like a good fit for them? So the problem here is that that is what philosophers would call relativism, where just any outlook is okay and will get sort of confirmed, as it were, through the AI. So the two options that we currently have are dogmatism and relativism. And I guess pretty much everyone in philosophy will agree with me that those are horrible options. What we need is, in some sense, something in between. We need something that can recognize a plurality of evaluative outlooks, something that we call pluralism. And what that means is that you recognize several, but not all, evaluative outlooks. With some outlooks, you're just going to say no. But you recognize a plurality of outlooks. those that in one way or another seem decent or okay or something like that, those where it seems imaginable that people find common ground. So I wanted to introduce this because those are topics that in philosophy are currently discussed, in lively ways and in ways where it is not yet clear that there are going to be solutions. And the only way in which I think that there can be solutions is precisely by bringing together, like as today, people who are in really different fields. And these people need to not just in some superficial way talk once in a while, but actually work together. Thank you.
I think.
You go to Jen.
That's fine. He's waiting.
Because I want to save Brian for the very last. Jianyu, would you like to share a few words with us?
Sure. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, very well.
Greetings.
Well, first I want to say that thank you very much for the invitation. When I got the invitation, I was really out to be invited to the setting of philosophers, in this discussion, that's something that's very far from my own training and the things I do. But needless to say that these issues did grapple me, constantly. Because in my practice of trying to find a solution, that I more and more feel that the solution of the issue of the crisis that we're facing right now goes beyond than the things that I was taught and also the things that I'm used to. So I treat this more as a way of disclosing and exposing the perspective from a field practitioner of sustainability and climate change, and to come here to look for solutions. And Philo just mentioned that I have been traveling quite extensively this month. I was in Brazil for the UNDESA Synergy meeting between sustainability and climate change. And then I was in Baku, Azerbaijan. As you know, that this year's the COP29 is going to be held in Baku at a really interesting time, and people are really looking for solutions. And also, just a word about myself. I was really trained as an engineer, and the closest I get to the topic that we're discussing today is probably the course I took at Carnegie Mellon's Engineering Public Policy of Robin Daw's cognitive heuristic and social decision science. So do bear with me if I always treat issues from a risk perspective and a cost-benefit way of thinking, rather than the philosopher thinking that that you guys are all the experts. For me, I think the issues that we're facing today really have two dimensions that has really been haunting me with regard to where we can find the solutions. There's the temporal dimension and also the spatial dimension of the issues that we're facing in the field of the sustainability. I think we need to recognize that the sustainability agenda that emerged from last century and the issues we're facing in this century is completely different. Everything has changed. And we are, to a certain extent, are at facing what we have innovated from the last century, particularly from the 1992, the Rio meeting that have started this whole sustainability agenda. We are facing the end of the fossil fuel. We're facing the end of the traditional trade, and we're facing the issues, even how we look at the environment, how we look at the sustainable issues. But I think one of the key aspects of the temporal dimension that we need to recognize is we are also facing the powerful driver of the climate change all over the place in terms of we're dealing with the sustainability goals that everybody described today, that probably as a word of failure with regard to how little progress that we have made towards the 2030 goal. So not only we have the different perceptions in terms of the issue that we're facing, but also I think we are facing, because of all the other issues that we face, we're faced the sense of everybody's looking for short-term success, so for the issue to be continuously recognized and supported by the leaders, where that is probably what we really need is a long-term solution. But I think people are not really no longer in this, at least from my limited perspective, that not really today are thinking and looking for the long-term solution, because the long-term solution just does not provide enough payback in terms of the cost that we incur today. And also, I think one of the key reasons for that, because of the enabling environment for the solutions that are drawn out of the unity of the global society is missing. And so even for the solvers of the issues, that people are increasingly looking for the short-term cue rather than the long-term solution. And it goes into many technical issues that probably go beyond this panel discussion, issues related to methane, and issues related to overshooting, and many of them. But I do need to recognize that people are saying that when we think about this, we should really not just think about ourselves, but also think about it is absolutely true that we understand and think about the alignment between different generations of our generation of 2030, and even beyond, generation of 2050, when everybody is going into sort of carbon neutrality, and even when people talk about by the time of 2100, even say with their aspirational goal 1.5 degree to be aspired. But have we thought about the people beyond 2100? One thing that keeps grappling me is whenever we think about the solutions to these issues, we are pretending that the world does not exist beyond 2100, and as if the development will stop, and we are no longer make any human progress beyond 2100. So that is one part of the issue that I definitely want to look for the solutions in the philosophy and in the collective, the human wisdom. The other one is, I think Jeff referenced to that graphically, is the spatial dimension of the issue that we're facing, and that's the geopolitical fragmentation. And that particularly I want to refer to, since I've been traveling in the developing countries. Now I'm working for the BRI initiative, the Chinese government initiative, really trying to further foster South-South collaboration, because we feel the missing of a real and true motivation to help the global South to solve the problem. We need to understand what really the true motivation and incentive for the emerging economies, so that we can really bring them together. And right now, I really feel that we just see further fragmentation and diversion between the developed countries and the developing countries, that even for the sustainability and also climate agenda, that drives us apart rather than unite us. So on both fronts, both the temporal and spatial dimensions, I have to say that I think our united effort combating climate change and also trying to achieve sustainability is probably not so successful, and I would even use the word failure in terms of approach. Is that because something that's deeply rooted in our human nature, that we're just not capable enough to deal with the issue that we brought by ourselves, or it is the mechanism that we are working together globally, mostly through the top-down approach, UN structure, even people trying to bring in that into trade agreement, even it's controversial, border adjustment mechanism, all that. Or we need to go back more to ourselves to think about a bottom-up approach, or rather than a hybrid approach in re-looking for the solution that will end up eventually catch us. And I keep mentioning, when I think about these issues, I really think about the compact that we sign with our future generations that I think increasingly people tend to forget, and just for focus for the short-term cue for the variety of the reasons. So I'll stop here, and I think I bring in more questions than answers, but that's exactly, I think, the reason why I want to be here and stay awake, and I'll be happy to participate in the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jianyu. Cisco, would you like to share a few words with us?
Thanks, Philo, and thank you to the organizers. I really would have wanted to be in New York with everybody to be physically present for this meeting, but unfortunately, my teaching has me at hello. So I am in South Africa, and at the moment, even still grading. I'm grateful to the speakers that came before me just because of the framing of the conversation and the kind of contribution that I wish to make this afternoon on Eastern Time and this evening on South African time. I want to sort of trace this conversation, or sort of trace my contribution by telling a story. One of our speakers very elegantly speaks about this notion of multiculturalism, if I understand her correctly, and her contribution, and how multiculturalism kind of gives us these two philosophical options, one being dogmatism, the other, of course, being this kind of relativist position, and we sort of arrive at a compromise of pluralism according to a lot of the sort of ethical, propositional debates that we're seeing today. But this debate doesn't necessarily account for a history that I would like us to consider, a history that I think feeds quite nicely into Jianyu's contribution, which is the history of marginalized peoples, the exploitation of their resources for the development of the global north, and how that entire history of global development subsequently leads to the current global climate challenges that we're faced with. And this particular history is one, as we all very well know, I'm situated on the African continent, maybe on the southernmost tip of the African continent, but it is a history of colonialism for Africa. And I bring this up because in many debates that we tend to have, Africa tends to sort of fall by the wayside without a conceptual understanding of what we can bring, even as we continue to be at the incredible receiving end of the decisions that are made on global fora. If you think about the impact of global climate change, at the moment we're supposed to be in spring in South Africa. Spring is supposed to have just supposed to have started. And across the country, we're experiencing snowfall. And this is a country that never experiences snowfall. So we see the absolute impact of the global climate change crisis. And again, South Africa is not necessarily at the forefront of the kinds of decisions that have led us here, even though we might be the largest coal-consuming nation in terms of our energy supply. We're not at the forefront of the global decisions that are made, and yet we are on the receiving end of some of those challenges. Now, in terms of tracing the story of historical injustices, if one can call them that, predicated on colonialism, in the South African experience, be that becoming apartheid, the response that often is given, and that was given most recently in our own history, was the response of conceptual decolonization, which I find to be rather limited in terms of the kinds of options that it can give us to think about specifically global multilateralism. And so I offer the project that I work on and sort of continue to think alongside, which is the project of the Black Archive, which sort of addresses two very fundamental sustainable development goals. So colleagues will sort of forgive me here, I'll switch in between sort of the philosophical chat and some of the training that I have been subjected to, which is in political theory. And so I sort of try to bridge this gap between the conceptual work as it applies to and as it feeds into responsive policy propositions as we see them not only in our context but more so globally. Now, in relation to the two SDGs that I've just suggested, as I said, is education, of course, and then this is SDG 4. And we also respond to SDG 16, thinking about building institutions for peace and justice, not only in our local context of South Africa, but thinking about how that feeds into global systems, thinking about peace and justice. Now, in some of the work that I've developed so far, I seek to suggest this idea of contending with the contribution of African intellectual traditions. And I suggest even sort of more radically in the South African context that these contributions that African intellectual traditions can make ought to be integrated into higher education curricula. So whether a student is reading in engineering, in natural sciences, in agriculture, in philosophy, in anthropology, in history, we ought to be thinking about the kind of intellectual traditions that have existed on the African continent prior to the moment of rupture, which is, of course, the colonial moment of contact. Now, the scholarship confronts the historical legacies of apartheid and colonialism, as I've indicated, which continue to shape educational institutions and structures, not only in South Africa, but globally. If you look at the structure of the university across the world, it's the same institution. And I seek to suggest that that sameness, this kind of monoculturalism in terms of the institutional type of the university, kind of abrogates our opportunities of thinking about multilateralism, global multilateralism being informed by multiculturalism, right? Now, all the while, I wish to engage students in critical reflections about their socio-political realities rather than imposing abstract, disconnected philosophical frameworks. Now, in terms of SDG 16, the work, again, that we're continuing to do speaks to sort of advancing social justice and epistemic equity, specifically in the South African context, and thinking about how paying attention to our site specificities could potentially contribute to reimagining global discourses around multilateralism, and specifically, as we say, multilateralism informed by multiculturalism, because necessarily of the historical sort of conditions that shape South African reality of a multicultural society. Now, in thinking about social justice and equity, I wish to advance how education can be a tool for achieving peace, justice, and the entrenchment of democracy in terms of strengthening our institutions, by calling for renewed efforts to ensure that higher education institutions serve as vehicles for social change, particularly for marginalized and historically disadvantaged communities. The work that we do in the Black Archives sort of advances the proposition that democracy can become more responsive to context specificities if it accounts for the realities of those it seeks to govern. From this position, I've made the case for a post-liberal conception of democracy. Now, of course, I'll start to sort of conclude, Philo, just so that I could be able to give more time to our colleagues. I want to think about how this framework that I've just sort of given us speaks to an articulation with the South African context, and then I want to move from South Africa and sort of say, how does paying attention to the South African context build the bridges for this kind of global multilateralism that we're after? Through the promotion and dissemination of African histories and epistemologies, I suggest that the Black Archive strengthens efforts to develop a more inclusive educational system that goes beyond traditional Western frameworks. This approach contributes to lifelong learning, particularly for underrepresented communities, and addresses the fourth SDG. Given South Africa's historical complexity of racial and social injustice, I seek to suggest and advance the proposition that the Black Archive's focus on fostering mutual understanding through inclusive education plays a crucial role in peace building and reconciliation. This supports SDG 16's objectives of promoting peaceful just and inclusive societies, particularly in a country that remains divided along historical lines. And of course, one can read this in the context of South Africa, but also read it in other contexts as well. The sort of post-colonial societies that are more sort of similar to the South African experience, I think here of Canada specifically, I think of New Zealand, and I think of Australia, which continue to negotiate these kinds of tensions of multiculturalism as multiculturalism intersects with inclusivity and peaceful democracies. Now, through its advocacy, the Black Archive encourages inclusive policymaking that reflects the values of transparency and accountability, which promotes multilateral cooperation by setting a precedent for other global South nations to influence global governance structures, ensuring that diverse voices are heard in shaping not only their own specific educational context, but international education and justice policies. The Black Archive strengthens multilateralism by advocating for epistemic diversity and social justice, positioning the Global South as a driver of inclusive global change. Fila, I think I can stop there and give time to our other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ricardo, how about you take over and share your insight with us?
Sorry, okay. Thank you, Fido. Thank you, Jeff, for the invitation. I have a PowerPoint, but I promise I will not overstep. So let me see. Okay, it's 4 parts: the biosphere, the noosphere, the human being, and global ethics. And global ethics, the guidance is the article by Kwasi Viredu in the first issue of the Journal of Global Ethics. It goes back to 2009. So it's about providing philosophical foundations. A few words on the World Congress of Philosophy Rome 2024. And I take it my distinguished colleague and friend Brian van Norden will talk about the G7 Valletta Declaration because he drafted it. Now, what strategies and philosophies? This is what we want to talk in this panel. And it's a chapter 3, Science, Technology, Innovation, and Digital Cooperation of the recommendations that Jeff has prepared before this meeting. Now, biosphere. As my predecessors have said, we don't want to talk about Eurocentric views. We want to talk about the world as it is. And so the Book of Changes simply says everything changes, nothing remains the same, and people should adapt. Now, my own position as a philosopher, since I'm asked to give mine, is that of spiritual humanism, which I have from my teacher and friend Du Wei-Ming. And there is this idea of the TND and the human being in between, and that the human being fits within the cosmic model and obeys the mandates of heaven. Tianming is many things, obviously, but let's say it's virtue. It's what we need to do in order to preserve life. Now, the green transition, it means China has discovered that the fast economy growth has a cost. Things have to change, so we have a new program for national park system, for instance, but actually China has done a lot in the last 20 years. Now let me come to the digital transition. This is an interesting point because the digital transition is a noosphere. Guglielmo Marconi thought about the noosphere Teilhard de Chardin thought about the noosphere first in the 30s when he knew from Guglielmo Marconi that the radio waves were surrounding the Earth. Now we have this cloth that surrounds the Earth, and it's artificial intelligence, it's information that runs. And what we don't want is to have this cloth divided. Artificial intelligence that speaks English, artificial intelligence speaks Chinese. So we need, this is a very crucial point for the development of artificial intelligence. And obviously, people before me have talked about sustainability, the issue of energy consumption. I don't need to stay on that. Now, let me come to anthropocosm. Now, this is about a human being. But it's about a human being preserving creation, as we say in Europe. And how does it work? You see, the anthropocentric view says the human being is a measure, the human being has power to change, the human being changes because he needs that. This is what is called anthropocentric ecology. And then you have the opposite of anthropocentric ecology, which is biocentric ecology, which means the environment must be preserved for the sake of the environment. Now, the Holy Father has written an encyclical called Laudato Si, in which he says exactly what the Chinese philosophers say, anthropocosmism. That is, the human being does not exercise his power on nature, the human being fits in nature. It accompanies it. The human being, as Tu Weiming says, is a servant, a partner, and a co-creator, and transmits the culture willed by heaven. It means it's about virtue. So this is the first thing I want to say on the human being. The second thing I wanted to say is migration, because it's a vital argument, at least for philosophers. Is it an issue for high-income countries? This is something we have discussed in some last meetings. But if you look at Kant, the formula of humanity, act so that you use humanity wherein your person is the person of others, always as a time and an end, never merely as a means. And we had the Kant Congress in Bonn last week, and people said, all right, not just a means, but also a thing or a threat. Now, how does it work? This is an argument that was done by Alex Cohen. It's a global ethics perfect duty says, I always ought to treat others as ends in themselves and not as mere things. Now, if I believe that people are things, I objectify them, I dehumanize, I bestialize them. And so I reduce them to their natural constitution. And this is really morally wrong. We have to challenge that. But there is also an epistemic wrong, because we stick to stereotypes, and we stick to hasty generalization, and we don't go deep enough to ground knowledge on sufficient grounds. And you have the famous declarations of Pope Francis on the plane. Migration is a right, it is a right that is in the scripture. In the Old Testament it was there, and he refers to Deuteronomy 10:18, the cause of the fatherless, widow and orphan. We are to love the strangers and fear the Lord. So from the point of view of spiritual humanism, migration is an issue that needs to be tackled. Now, how do we, And there is a place in the Sustainable Development Goals, and it is growth, SDG 8, and I don't need to read it, but you just heard it from His Majesty the King of Lesotho. We have to stop exploiting migrant labor. So it's a very hot philosophical issue which is now being pursued. Now, there are ways to achieve safe, orderly, and regular migration. There are some documents in which you know. But let me come to Quasi Viredu. So Quasi Viredu started the Journal of Global Ethics and said, today, in 2006, global ethics considers globalization in various forms of social activity, including economic, political, and cultural life. Issues of globalization ask for new approaches to address conflicts that arise when different cultural norms and practices collide. And this is what my distinguished colleague Sisako Kumalo was saying. And so we need to confront these cultural norms and have something out of it. So globalization asks the philosophy for an innovative narrative of inclusion and reflection. Now, you know about Agenda 2030 and Agenda 2050. Let me say that since October 2019, at the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, the then Chancellor Marcelo Sanchez Sorondo and Jeffrey Sachs, who is here with us, have proposed to place alongside the text of Agenda 2030 to the text of the Beatitudes. This was an explicit wish of the Holy Father, Pope Francis. And here are the Beatitudes: Luke, you know them, I don't need to read, and Matthew. And let me conclude by stressing, how can one be blessed in the condition of material and spiritual poverty, suffering, violence, injustice, retribution, addiction, loss of freedom, social conflict, wars, persecution? And the answer is, look for the spiritual help. The spiritual help is virtue. And the bliss of the text of Beatitudes is not material, it is something one experiences and feels deeply, that gives us one serenity, confidence and hope, even if, from an emotional point of view, one is worried, even external circumstances are very unfavorable. And here I can stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Brian, would you like to say a few words?
Does this work? Yes. We face a serious educational crisis in the world today. The crisis is that the rest of the world understands the West, the civilization, the literature, the religions, the philosophy of the West, much better on average than the West understands the rest of the world. To put it in a simple slogan, the rest understands the West better than the West understands the rest. So in my remarks today, I'd like to say something about how we got into this situation and what we can do to get out of it. Now, if you look back at European philosophy textbooks as late as the 18th century, there were three common views about how philosophy originated in the world. One of the common views in European philosophy textbooks up through the 18th century was that philosophy originated in Africa. And from Africa, philosophy was given as a gift to the Greek world. A second major view was that philosophy began in India, and from India, philosophy migrated to ancient Greece. Now, I'm sure you all can imagine what the third major view was about the origin of philosophy. It was that philosophy developed independently in both India and Africa, and both of them gave it to ancient Greece. The view that philosophy began independently in ancient Greece, much less that it began uniquely in ancient Greece, was considered a weird fringe view in European philosophy as late as the 18th century. So, given this open-minded attitude, it's no surprise that when people first learned about Chinese philosophy, they were very receptive to it and very excited about it. The sayings of Confucius and his immediate disciples are called in English the Analects, in Chinese the Lunyu, and the first translation of the sayings of Confucius into a European language was done by Jesuit missionaries. And the Jesuits have extensive familiarity with Western philosophy as part of their training. And they translated the sayings of Confucius into Latin with the title Confucius Sonorum Philosophus, Confucius, the Chinese philosopher, because they immediately recognized that Confucianism was philosophic and very interesting philosophy at that. It wasn't just the Jesuits who were excited about Confucianism as a philosophy. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, who appears on any standard history of modern Western philosophy curriculum, was a true Sinophile. And in fact, he said that Confucian ethics were better than Western ethics. He added, though it is shameful for us to admit this. He said that Confucian ethics are more suited to the life of mortals like us, as opposed to the less realistic Western ethics. Leibniz was also fascinated because Leibniz, of course, invented binary arithmetic, which is the basis of computers. So the next time you use a computer, thank a philosopher. You're welcome. But Leibniz, when he learned about the I Ching, the classic of changes, the Chinese divination and philosophy text that describe situations using hexagrams, collections of 6 broken or unbroken lines, Leibniz recognized broken and unbroken lines are essentially zeros and ones. And he said, my God, they invented binary arithmetic before I did. Well, given all the excitement about Chinese philosophy, obviously Chinese philosophy continued to be a standard part of the Western philosophy curriculum up to the present day. No, it didn't. Why not? The simple answer, I'm afraid, is Immanuel Kant. Now, Immanuel Kant was undeniably a brilliant philosopher, and in some ways I consider myself a Kantian, and many people have found emancipatory ideas in the philosophy of Immanuel Kant. And Kant certainly did not invent the notion of pseudo-scientific racism, but he bought into it once he discovered it. It's not as well known because he doesn't write about it mostly in his more well-known works, but in his lectures, he ranked the races hierarchically, with whites at the top. Whites, Kant informs us, contain all talents and motives in themselves. And so they are the only race capable of philosophy. And you'll have to pardon my language here, but I'm just repeating what Kant said. Sometimes we have to look at ugly things to confront them. Kant said, Hindus look like philosophers, but they are incapable of abstract thought, and so will never achieve science or philosophy. Obviously, Kant had never read a single work of Indian philosophy, or he'd know better, or Indian science for that matter. Kant said the Chinese are on the same level as the, again, pardon my language, the Hindus, because their own books tell us that they have not advanced a single bit beyond what their sages came up with thousands of years ago. The Africans, Kant tells us, are, Kant's language, chatty and vain, and can only be trained to be servants. And he said the indigenous people of the America, according to Kant, don't talk and are infertile, a claim which on the face of it has to be false of the human beings who occupied the Americas before Europeans came in. Now, you might say, okay, so Kant's he was a racist, but we don't read those works anymore. Who cares? The reason we should care is that Kant was a great philosopher who transformed Western philosophy, and his disciples rewrote the philosophy textbooks in Europe. And they wrote Asia, Africa, and the indigenous traditions of the America out of the philosophy textbooks. Now, the vast majority, not all, but the vast majority of my colleagues in philosophy would reject the explicit racism of Kant's account. But they accept the tainted fruit of Kant's account, which is the unargued assumption that there never was any philosophy in any tradition besides the tradition that goes back to Plato and Aristotle. And just a quick digression on this point, occasionally my colleagues in philosophy will say, well, Brian, why do you have to bring racism into this? You know, what do you think it's about racism? Isn't it just about ignorance? I can't tell you how many times I have said to people things like, have you considered hiring someone in Chinese philosophy? And they say, well, there is no such thing as Chinese philosophy. And I ask them, well, what have you read that is considered Chinese philosophy that you disagree is philosophy? And they say, oh, I haven't read any, but I just know there isn't any. And I know the same things happens with Indian philosophy, with African philosophy, with indigenous American philosophy. People feel they don't have to read it. They know a priori it doesn't exist. That is why this is about structural racism. So what's been the effect of Kant? There are only about 13% of the doctoral programs in philosophy in the United States. Is there anybody on staff who can competently supervise a dissertation on Chinese philosophy? And there is not a single Ivy League university that has anyone in its philosophy department capable of supervising a dissertation on Chinese philosophy. Now, the situation of Indian philosophy is a little more complicated. Here at Columbia, it's one of the few doctoral programs in philosophy where you can actually study Indian philosophy. They have an assistant professor, I hope they tenure her someday, who covers Indian philosophy. But overall, there are fewer places where you can study South Asian or Indian philosophy in the United States than there are places where you can study Chinese philosophy. African philosophy, about in the same boat as Indian philosophy. My friend Ricardo Pazzo mentioned Kwasi Wiredu, who passed away just a few years ago. He was one of the few scholars in the United States teaching African philosophy, and he's passed away. As for indigenous American philosophy, last time I checked, there were 3 doctoral programs where you could study the thought of the people who lived in the Americas before the Europeans came in. So what can we do about this? Well, I wrote a book, Taking Back Philosophy, and I argued in this book, if you liked some of the documentation for the claims I've just made, or learned, or some quick responses to some of the tedious and fallacious arguments against teaching Chinese or African or Indigenous American or South Asian philosophy in philosophy departments, I talk about that in Taking Back Philosophy. But in the book, I say we need to take back philosophy in two senses. We need to take back philosophy to the cosmopolitan ideal that originally motivated philosophy. Plato knew there were interesting ideas in other cultures and he wanted to learn about them. Most people knew this until the beginning of the modern era. So we need to take philosophy back to its cosmopolitan roots, its cosmopolitan and multicultural roots. Also, I think we should take philosophy back to its roots as something concerned with philosophy as a way of life. Too often, especially in the English-speaking world, philosophy has become a bunch of intellectual parlor games where people are willing to fight to the death over the question of whether the sentence, "the current king of France is bald," is false or neither true nor false. I have a colleague from graduate school who wrote a whole book about that. I'm not making that up. This is a real thing philosophers like to argue about instead of the meaning of life. And when you think about philosophy in a cosmopolitan way and about the meaning of life, what you recognize is that there are 4 topics that people discuss across many, many civilizations. What is the right way to live? What is the best way of life? In English, we technically refer to that as human flourishing. And in Chinese, you would refer to it as randao, the way of a human. Or in ancient Greek, you'd refer to it as eudaimonia. Or in Latin, you'd refer to it as beatitudo, similar concept across different cultures. How they fill that concept out is often different, but they're interested in that topic. And if you care about ways of life, then you're also going to care about the personality traits, the character traits you need to live that way of life. In English, we call those virtues. In Chinese, they call them de, or in modern Chinese, mei de. In Greek, they call them arete, and in Latin, they call them virtu. And if you care about virtues, you have to care about how you cultivate the virtues. And in English, we just call that ethical cultivation. In Chinese, you could say shouyang. In Greek, you'd say paideia, and in Latin, you'd say humanitas. And of course, if you're caring about cultivating virtues so you can live a way of life, you care about what is human nature like so that it's possible to live that way of life and cultivate those virtues. And we talk about human nature in English, which comes from the Latin natura, which is their version of the Greek physis, and in Chinese you talk about renxing, human nature. So we find different answers to common questions. And in an interconnected, multipolar world, we need to understand what other people think on these topics and not just deal in memes or caricatures of what they think. Now, if you'd like some concrete recommendations about how to make education multicultural, when the G7 nations met recently in Italy, they called together a group of leading philosophers and me to, glad you laughed at that, to develop a statement on the needs of philosophy going forward. And we wrote in the city of Barletta, the Barletta Declaration on Philosophy and Interculturality. And you can find it on my website, bryanvannoorden.com. That's BRYANVANNORDEN.com. Sorry, I'm misspelling it, but for some reason people find my name incredibly difficult to spell. I don't mind, but you won't find the web. But if you just looked up Barletta Declaration, it should take you to my website. I also have links there to syllabi and readings for different kinds of philosophy. So I'd like to end with an anecdote that I think kind of illustrates, and I say the Barletta Declaration will give you some concrete suggestions for how to achieve multicultural philosophy. But I'd like to end on an anecdote. There's a European university that had a bit of controversy recently. This European university, there was this young upstart philosopher who wanted to introduce a new figure to the philosophical curriculum. And a lot of the conservatives on the faculty said, well, this guy is not a part of our tradition. and you're watering down the curriculum with all these non-canonical thinkers and texts. Students literally almost rioted about this change in the curriculum. The university I'm talking about is the University of Paris. The debate I'm talking about took place in the 13th century. The young upstart philosopher was St. Thomas Aquinas, and he was trying to introduce Aristotle back into the European philosophical curriculum because his works had been lost, but fortunately preserved in the Islamic world. And now they were being translated into Latin. And by the way, there's some evidence that Aquinas only worked from Latin translations of Aristotle's works. And there are plenty of translations of Indian and Chinese and African and indigenous American philosophy. And for me, what's really exciting about Thomas Aquinas is that Aquinas was someone who had his own Christian faith, but he wanted to learn from pagans like Plato and Aristotle. He wanted to learn from Jews like Maimonides. He wanted to learn from Muslims like Avicenna and Averroes. And he recognized that respecting his own tradition was completely consistent with loving and learning from other traditions as well. And that approach, the way I would summarize that is to use lines from the great Latin poem Terence, who, and this is an English translation, of course, Terence said, "I am a human, and nothing human is alien to me." Or, as Kongzi's disciple Zisha said, 四海之内，皆兄弟也. Within the four seas, all are brothers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Your talk is always very interesting. I would like to open the discussion to the audience. If you have any question, feel free to raise your hands, and our staff there will deliver the microphone to you if you have any question.
Thanks all, lovely panel, really enjoyed listening. One question that's buzzing in my head, is raised by Katya and others on the panel, is how do you allow for civilizational thinking and discourse within philosophy and not abide a kind of script where certain individuals and or groups empower themselves by articulating a version of what it means to be that civilization, that group? So this is always, I agree with you, I think they do exist, but I worry about the way in which they're deployed discursively to deny people their right to be fully human. So, and I see this happening in our politics in this country, and I worry about that when we start to embrace this idea of civilization or cultural group norms of thinking. So if you could respond, I'd love that.
I think that that's an excellent question. One problem with, is the mic okay?
Yes, yes.
One problem with this whole idea of, now let's learn something about this culture and that culture is that if people don't do that, they might spend their whole life thinking about problems in one culture, and they have a lot to think about. So once we say, okay, I'm going to somehow understand these 3 different frameworks or 10 different frameworks, we are bound to give up so much depth, so much complexity, and so on, and yet we want to do it. So the kind of and then we end up like with this danger that you mentioned, that someone is going to define it. What does it mean to be whatever, an Aristotelian or a Confucian or whatever? And then if you had 20 people in the room who were all experts on Confucius, they would all disagree, of course, and it would be in some sense like an important conversation to have that kind of like range of interpretations, versions, ways of updating it, ways of translating it in our conceptual scheme today, and so on. So I think you're totally right. I think it is a big problem. At the same time, what can we do in a way? We cannot just say, okay, everyone has only so much capacity to learn something, hence I will only study Aristotle. That, given like the classrooms we are in, given the conversations we are in globally, that will simply not do. So to some extent, I believe in collaboration. I believe more in collaboration between experts than in everyone pretending that they can talk about everything. Because that can easily, but it is difficult. Like we are in a sense negotiating two incompatible aims. The aim to understand a range of frameworks and the aim to be actually doing justice to any particular framework, see the complexities, see the different ways of making sense of it, and so on.
My name is Klaus Leising, and I have spent a big part of my life teaching business ethics and corporate responsibility on the one hand at the University of Basel, but on the other hand having a management position at the Novartis pharmaceutical company. The point that I was fighting for was how can we motivate managers to deal with something that is that they are not measured in, that they do not have targets and bonuses on, and if one sends them to Harvard Business School's courses, they learn how to better maximize profits and nothing else. So that brings me to a second one. I was, for the last 30 years, part of Hans Kung's work on global ethics, and I hope that, somebody would bring this up, because they are relatively simple things. First of all, let's treat all human beings humanely, and secondly, let's apply the golden rule. This is something that every idiot can understand. And to translate it into a more practical language, it is these 4 moral commitments: commitment for a culture of non-violence and respect for life, culture of solidarity and just economic order, culture of tolerance and life of truthfulness, culture of equal rights and partnership, and ecological care. Now, what I have tried then is said, what does that mean for a manager in charge of marketing, for a manager in charge of finance? And the point is that there is in a lot of business people, but also political people, that division between me as a private human being. Of course, I do this, this, and this, and this. However, in a fair societal division of duty, this is not my part, so I stay legal. And we all know, and we have heard over the past days, that legality as such is not something to be discussed. It's the legitimacy. It's what can we do more than what is currently demanded by law. And, I just wanted to encourage all of you, go back and look for Hans Kung's Global Ethics. There's a lot of things out there that can help to bring things down to earth. My experience is, if you talk about Aristoteles or Platon with a business community, they will all go on the table and look at their mails, and that's about it. And how can we create incentives that they think a bit broader than just by business, in business management terms?
Should I now ask my question? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'm also a philosopher, and I've been honored to join Jeff and Philo and Brian and most of the panel on the trips that Philo mentioned. I want to share 2 brief anecdotes, and then I have a question. So I started this startup community engagement project a few years ago called Philosophy in the Schools New Haven, where I go into public schools, and when they'll let me, when I can get past the bureaucracy, and I give lectures and discussions on philosophy. And they're really well received. The kids absolutely love them because they've never been able to think like that before in the way that public schools work in the United States. The second anecdote is I was teaching virtue ethics at a big state public institution where I teach last week, and after I was going on and on about virtue ethics, a student raised their hand and said, well, what does virtue mean? And so I see a real problem here that students are not learning about any of this stuff. I mean, we're talking about traditions and depth of traditions and really understanding traditions, but at least in the United States where we're sitting right now, most students don't have an opportunity to learn about any tradition until they're quite of age, unless they have a family or religious tradition that allows them. So since we have this beautiful panel with representatives from different countries, and maybe other countries have educational systems that are different, and we had a wonderful panel on the global schools yesterday, and I see the last panel's on the youth. So my question is, oh, and let's not forget that for Aristotle, character education starts very young, or else it's not possible. So how can we change our educational system in the United States to perhaps be a support, for this kind of multilateral global ethics that we're even trying to imagine?
Brian? Yeah?
I got to solve that problem? Okay. No, that's an excellent question. I've had the same experience. I've gotten to the point where when we start talking about virtue ethics, I explain what virtues are. And I point out, I think part of the problem is the term virtue has an archaic ring in modern English. And so if you talk about virtue, usually people think it has something to do with sexuality primarily, and that they don't realize it relates to other aspects of a person's character. But I try to, that's why I like this framework I came up with, where I said, look, you have a conception of what it is to live well, right? You might think you don't, but that's because you're thinking of a very narrow notion of, say, what it is to be a super moral person. And you say, well, I don't care about that. But you have some idea of what you think your life would look like if it turned out well. Maybe you think it's just to be rich. Okay, that's your conception of living well. I think it's a shallow conception of living well, and I hope I can show you in the course why it's shallow, but it's a conception of what it is to live well. And then you're going to need character traits to succeed in what you think is living well. The exercise of those character traits will be necessary to live well. Virtues is just a fancy name for those character traits you need to live well. And unless you're incredibly lucky, and 99.9% of us are not, you're going to have to cultivate those character traits. That's ethical cultivation. And your view of what it is to live well, and your view of what character traits you're going to need to live well and how you cultivate them had better make sense out of given whatever you think human nature is. So guess what? You have a view of what it is to live well, what human flourishing is, what the virtues are, what ethical cultivation is, and what human nature is before you even walked into this philosophy class. Let's look at what some smart people thought were good answers to these questions, and you can decide how to incorporate that into your own conception. So that's how I motivate it with my students. I know it's not a complete answer, but that's how I address that in my class. Do you want to say anything, Jeff? Or Katja?
I wanna give the microphone to Cisco. Would you like to share some of your insight on this question?
Thanks, Philo. I was just actually typing up a comment in, corresponding with Abigail, since she's the person we see on our side here. So I've worked in the United States for quite a bit, actually, with a couple of colleagues in graduate schools in education who are also thinking about teacher education and how that, how teacher education programs in the United States affect or impact the public school system in the United States. And there's a very interesting sort of reality that one sort of brushes up against in those very spaces, which is what Brian was talking about, where the world knows a ton about the United States, and the United States knows nothing about the world. And so what often happens in those conversations where people are like, oh, we're open to learning, we're open to finding out different ways of doing things, is that those of us who come from marginal spaces are often sort of, I don't want to put this, crudely, but we're often sort of sidelined in those conversations. And yet we know how the public education systems work in the context of the United States. Some of those systems have actually been brought into our own contexts. They failed, and we have had to revise the kind of policy positions that we have held in our own contexts as a result of it. And we sort of attempt to bring that knowledge in, but that sort of cross-context pollination doesn't often happen because people who are in charge of teacher education programs, education revision, policy revision programs, as well as making a dent on the public system in the education space in the United States, are often not as willing to hear from folks who are coming from outside. But in our own context, I'll just say, something very simple. And I've written about this quite extensively, actually, about sort of acknowledging the kind of knowledge, or the experiential knowledge that students bring into our classrooms, and to allow students to tap into that as part and parcel, what again Brian is talking about, which is to say you have a conception of what it means to live a good life, even though that conception might be bogged down by certain sociocultural ideas and sociocultural definitions of what living good sort of seeks to suggest. I think that there are those two parts. It's to acknowledge students as agential knowers in our own spaces, but secondly, to try and really deepen this cross-cultural, cross-border conversation that facilitates multilateralism. Because, as I say, there's often this kind of resistance when those of us are coming into the system, because we are assumed not only to be unknowing, but if you go back to V.Y. Mudimbe's The Invention of Africa, we are assumed to be gradual, to be backward, and to be retarded. And I apologize if the language is a bit too strong, but fundamentally, that is the logic of colonialism, that is the logic of imperialism. Thanks, Phelan.
Thank you. Ricardo, I know you want to share a few things with us as well, and we still have questions in the audience. Could you please quickly share with us, and we make sure we can still get the question.
Very short on Brian and on what the gentleman of artist said. Well, I wanted to say we have started. The global philosophy, the global history of philosophy curriculum has started. Habermas has started it with a new book, and even older institutions like the Überweg Grundgeschichte der Philosophie, they consider each tradition. And if you think of what we did at the World Congress of Philosophy, I was in the program committee. We were maniacal, strict that in each plenary panel, all traditions were presented, especially the marginalized one. So we try to give word to everybody. And if you want, the question is, again, for the gentleman of artists, why should the executive be interested? Well, so far, and this is also what happened in the World Congress, philosophers have interpreted the word in various ways. They still have to show that we are going to change it. They need to have proposals that change the situation we are in. And so that philosophers now work for the Agenda 2050 is beautiful. It's what they have to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have one more question in the back of the audience.
No, thank you very much for what very wonderful and insightful sessions. And I would take it from the angle of the link between philosophy and development. I think back in the 80s, it was so important that UNESCO was pushing such an agenda. And then it permeated the development world to the point where in the World Bank at some point, what they call immersion program, where to actually be a good country economist, you had to go and live in certain communities to really understand where they're coming from. But I was very enlightened by this conversation, but also came out of very concerned, because if, in essence, the philosophy are the most enlightened of the community, and then from what Brian said in terms of even the biases, entrenched biases that we are still dealing with today, but in the 21st century, then what does that tell us about what we are trying to do in moving toward a better world? How do we bridge that? And my view is that it's important to actually move to what I call the collective imaginary, that we are on the same plane to be able to move much rapidly. And we need a philosopher to do that, but what I'm hearing is very disheartening, quite frankly. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
One more question back here.
So once again, congratulations. It's fantastic. The panel is fantastic and the ideas. I'm from Romania. By origin, I'm a Crimean Tatar. I'm also practitioner Muslim. And I would like to tell you the moment when I got the answer to these aspects, when I had the chance of having an audience with Pope Francis in Rome. So, of course, everything, in my opinion, without being a philosopher, I think is anthropogenic. Because at the end, everything is reflected on ourselves. But then we have this option of these multiple choices. And among these multiple choices, what Pope Francis advised was, first of all, look into your inside and think and try to understand if the choice is in resonance with yourself, with your soul. So I think at the end, we are human beings. We are not machines or, let's say, artificially intelligent tools. We have a soul, and the reality that we are building is anthropogenic, but we have to consider it in resonance with our feelings. What is your opinion? How philosophy is answering to this?
I'm happy to say just sort of one sentence, because I realize we want to wrap up. Maybe the answer of sort of looking to the inside is one of the few common denominators between any number of different philosophical traditions. That this kind of reflection, even asking questions like, what is virtue? Maybe your student actually became a philosopher through your teaching and was able to ask, what is that to be virtuous? That is maybe a really good thing, that that kind of question is being asked. And it could be part of looking to the inside, asking yourself, what is really important to me? What is it to be a good person? And so on and so forth. And I would argue that those types of questions are maybe where different outlooks can meet, and agree that those are questions we all want to ask and need to ask.
Let me just add, it's a wonderful panel, and everybody is engaged in it, and this discussion does not happen in the UN Security Council. It does not happen at the G20. It does not happen among world leaders. It does not happen among generals. This is a very serious problem, which is that we are not having a philosophical discussion about the kind of world that we want among people who are determining our lives and deaths. And that, I think, is extremely pertinent and serious. There has been no philosophical discussion about the war in Gaza. There has been no philosophical discussion about the war in Ukraine among the people who are dropping the bombs or choosing whether to drop the bombs or to find a different way or to find a different approach. And this, to me, is why this discussion is also extremely pertinent. Of course, it's pertinent for our children. It's pertinent for how we live. It's pertinent for how we hope young people will live and learn, because they're going to be in a very diverse and global world. But we're also at a point of, as the doomsday clock says, 90 seconds to midnight, and we don't have the most basic appreciation of other societies, and don't even know that we don't, and don't even know how to get it. So there are assumptions made every day here about what the Chinese are going to do, so that we can have a war by 2027, says the US Navy. This is insanity. And this is the level of stupidity, I'll use a harsh word, but that we really are governed by right now. Now, one of the things and by the way, just the list of issues that came up that are philosophical issues as well as economic or political or sociological or any other category: migrants, marginalized populations, post-colonial populations, clash of civilizations, future generations, relations to the biosphere. These are all intrinsically deeply philosophical issues that are not so much discussed in a philosophical way in places where it needs to be. one of the things as I studied more and more philosophy, one of the things that I came to love about philosophy is that the great philosophers that we know of were not sitting in classrooms. They're all failed politicians, almost all of them. Or even better, from my point of view, failed policy advisors. I love the fact that Plato failed 3 times in trying to advise the Syracusa in Sicily, because if he can fail, it gives us license for all of us to fail. One of the times he was nearly arrested and sold off to slavery, but he escaped at the last moment, so I'm just trying to take notes. Well, I was going to say that Confucius spent his whole life up to age 70 going from kingdom to kingdom, being ignored, basically. Until he sat down with his disciples and then taught for the next 2,000 years what to do. But during his lifetime, he was mostly ignored. Machiavelli wrote The Prince as basically a job application to get the job back with the Medici. Locke, these are not all my favorites, but because they wrote for patrons, the Earl of Shaftesbury in that case, and he was secretary for the Carolinas. And John Stuart Mill worked for 40 years for the East India Company. I don't think he got a lot right out of that particular part of his career. But the idea is we need to bring this discussion in a very practical way also, in a rather urgent way. And it's very, very rich. And our assumptions about how others behave are very culturally determined by our own views. I think one of the things Pope Francis teaches the most, by the way, is what his encyclical Fratelli Tutti is about, and that is encounter. And the idea is that if you really want a philosophical approach, listen to the other and know how to make that encounter. And that encyclical is dedicated, it's the first ever, I think, Catholic papal encyclical dedicated to a Muslim leader. It's dedicated to the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar. And it opens actually with a description of St. Francis of Assisi, and this is a historical truth, traveling on foot, basically, in ship to Damietta, Egypt, in the 5th Crusade in 1219 to meet with the Sultan Kamil al-Malik to try to make peace between the Christians and the Muslims on the battlefield. And he had an all-night discussion with the Sultan. Peace did not come in that way, but it was another encounter that was extraordinary. So I want to thank all the panelists and all the philosophers, and Jian Yu, a colleague on our practical side of things, but philosophical in his own right, for how rich this is, how meaningful it is, how important it is, and how much we have to really propel it into active political discourse as well, because this is not only philosophical, to put it in quotation marks, this is the most practical, and that's how philosophy has always been. That was the tradition, practical, and we need it practically speaking today more than ever. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. I will give the stage to our colleagues. Thank you very much. And I also think we should give an applause for ourselves, because we listened to 1.5 hours of philosophy. And let's be honest, that doesn't happen all the time. So yeah.
Please stay seated for our next session, beginning momentarily. Please stay seated. Thank you. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Paul Walsh, Vice President of Education at SDSN and Director of SDG Academy. please take your seats for our next session. Please take your seats for our next session. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, we'll get started shortly. I think we just have some photos happening. All right, ladies and gentlemen, so I am going to start the session because otherwise we will not finish the program until 12 o'clock tonight. Okay. So this session is entitled Empowering Youth and Future Generations Through Transformative Education. And of course, while you've been listening to proceedings today, the good news is the Pact for the Future came out of silence, so that's good. So it looks like we will have something to actually talk about. The other bit of good news is I was quite disappointed with how much education was mentioned in the Pact for the Future. And to be fair, in say, Chapter 2, peace education, global citizenship education, education for sustainable development, not mentioned. Nothing about empathy, nothing about love, nothing about compassion. But I guess the good news is that they did reference the political declaration that the Irish and Qatari signed last year, and that is actually very good on Mission 4.7. So it was said that they'd implement the wishes of that political declaration. But the very good news today, though, is I read the Digital Compact, and that is brilliant on education, right? So I know it's all about online and open educational resources and training and digital infrastructures, etc. But it's really powerful on education. So that's good news. Okay, I'm here I'm delighted to be back again with Dr. Yaoshi, Minister of Education for Ghana. Most of you will remember on Solutions Day, back in the TESS, Transforming Education Summit, which is part of our common agenda, Jeff and the Minister for Education from Greece and Ghana, and we had Ireland, they really put on quite a show, and it was actually quite a viral video. So we're back again, and I was telling him earlier that we're all going back to business, where in the 3rd World OER Congress with UNESCO in Dubai, November 19th and 20, we're all back in action again with our project. So just to say that His Excellency, he's a teacher by training, and I guess the thing that he dreams of is a Ghana, he says this, he dreams of a Ghana where every child, regardless of their background, whether poor or privileged, will be afforded equal opportunity, right? But he's so talented, I think he needs to up his game. And I think all of us are depending on him coming into our partnerships. And let's delete Ghana and let's insert the world. And let every child globally be a benefit of your dream and your talent. So I'll give you the floor for 10 minutes, and thank you.
Thank you so much, and Prof. Sachs, and our distinguished panelists, and everyone here gathered. I'm honored to be here, and I'm sure you heard him. He said 10 minutes. You give a mic to a politician and give him 10 minutes. As you really put him in a serious trouble. but I'll try to do justice to the 10 minutes requirement. Coming back to Colombia, we've been here about the third year that we've come for events like this, thanks to Prof. Sachs and inviting us to share our opinion and ideas as to what's going on in the education system. I'm not new to America. I did not lose my accent living here for 26 years, so don't make a mistake and think I'm just coming from Ghana. I live here for 26 years in Los Angeles. I was a high school mathematics teacher and then got crazy and decided to join the movement to change education. I became a charter school founder. I founded 3 charter schools, and they're all doing well in South LA. And that is when the current president came to America, heard of me, came to find me, and he asked me a very simple question that changed my life. Would you consider coming back to Ghana to help me change the education system? I responded, and took me back to Ghana after 26 years, literally going back to a country that I did not know much about. I had left the place. But I was determined that we could do some work there. So I sat here through the philosophy class, even if it's at the tail end. Then I began to revise my education philosophy notes from University of Southern California, where I did my PhD, and began to take a look at social reconstructionism, which is how do you use education to transform society. So at the Transforming Education Summit, I was sitting there thinking about, we are transforming education, but for a country like Ghana, education carries a dual burden. You are not just there transforming individuals, but you have to position education to transform your country. Very different from the movement that we fought for in America. Here I knew if I could educate the children well and counsel them well, they will be able to fit into society and do some big things for themselves. But in Ghana, I'm thinking, if I do not position education well, my country will never be out of poverty. So that dual burden then creates a sense of urgency where you take a look at your education system and you are not talking about reform, you are talking about transformation, which then takes you to a place when you have to look at access. How do I open the floodgates of education to all and for all? And that quest then have to begin to take you to a place where you have to be more audacious. My government was more audacious when it came to secondary education. After 60 years of independence in Ghana, majority of the children ended their education at the junior high. High school was not free. Then come a president who says, I'll make it free. In a country where 70% of high school students are in boarding schools, when you make it free, it means everybody is going to eat 3 times a day for free, 70%. The other 30% you fed once, hot lunch, every day. How are you going to do it? Most development partners were running away from that proposal, saying, no, you can't do it. You're a developing country. How can you do this? Then we have limited facilities also as a major barrier. This is why America came to the rescue when we look at the facilities and we said it's limited. America did not come to rescue with money, but what I had taught in the school system I taught in LA at the time was a year-round school, where you're able to increase enrollment without immediately adding more buildings. You divide the school into 3, 2 cohorts are there at a time, whilst the other one was on vacation. We took that idea, which I had worked in for 10 years in California, to Ghana, and therefore we're able to remove the infrastructure barrier that was going to prevent us from implementing free secondary education. With that done, then with the cost removal, parents were now free to send their children to secondary schools. Consequently, with the innovation from California, the year-round schools, and with the cost barrier removed, we've grown enrollment from 800,000 to 1.4 million in our high schools in Ghana. Then, with that access barrier removed, we began to look at the numbers and saw for the first time that we had gender parity in secondary education, very rare in sub-Saharan African countries. Cost barrier was really compelling parents to look at, do I send a boy to school or do I send a girl? And the answer always was, let the boy go. Let the girl stay at home after junior high. So before free secondary education was introduced, 100 boys in high school, then you have 68 girls in high school. But today, for every 100 boys, you have 106 girls in high school in Ghana. The equity barrier is broken. Then we have to take a look at how do we also ensure that we improve the quality of teaching and learning. We started with how we train teachers. It used to be that teachers were only required to have a diploma, which was just 3 years of education, 2 years in the classroom, 1 year in the, for practicum, and you were ready to teach. We changed that. Now you require a bachelor's degree to teach from kindergarten all the way to high school. Major investment, but the government felt it was necessary to do that, and we've done that. Then we look at teacher credentialing, which was never the case in Ghana. Now it is the norm. Teachers are licensed before they teach in the classroom. So we're not just looking at tinkering on the edges in terms of reforming something, but total transformation. Then we've moved full steam ahead in terms of STEM education. Science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Then again, I was able to borrow from my experience in America in terms of magnet schools and academies. And now we have high schools in Ghana where we are doing aviation and aerospace programs. There's a girls' high school that have developed a drone, and now they are flying the drones. This is not rote memorization anymore. The very foundation of education system is changing. And you go and you see students doing robotics, artificial intelligence. We have 3D printers in high schools. And the last time, friends of mine in the US saw some of the, this is, I do a few clips. I know my time is, yeah, so you have that. There's a group of girls in a girls' school that decided that they would build a drone. They met, they designed it, and not just like a prototype, but you can see the drone flying. And they fly for about 45 minutes, came back to land. And I showed this in UNESCO about a year ago, and they clapped for Ghana. What we are saying is this. We can change the education system, not for its own sake, but we need to build a critical mass of Ghanaians, and that's the drone. Critical mass with critical minds to change our country. So we are not just looking at how do you introduce a new curriculum, new coursework, but we are looking at the 4 C's of critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and effective communication, which we want to ensure that is really the cross-cutting for everything that we do. So what we are saying is this. In Ghana, we are seriously looking at transformation. Education, technology. Every high school student is now getting a tablet, every one of them. And it's saving us about $200 million in terms of printing textbooks. MasterCard Foundation, which operates very well in Africa, and I'm so happy when I'm holding a MasterCard. Because they set aside a lot of money into a MasterCard Foundation, and that foundation is making serious investment in education in Africa. They donated money for subject area experts to write e-books. And these are not PDF version of the books. E-books have hyperlinks. If you are reading it, you can click on a link, and it takes you to a video where you can understand the concept better. So beginning the next academic year, every Ghanaian high school student will have a tablet with the e-books loaded on it, linked with a learning management system, which enable them to do their homework, classwork activities all online, and then infused with a very robust assessment system, which has artificial intelligence infused in there, which enable assessment to be done. And it's very exciting. So in fact, what we are doing is literally doing what the Brookings Institution calls leapfrogging inequality. Because if we are to take the linear approach of following how America did it, we are not going to be able to catch up. But we have a rare opportunity to look at how do we leapfrog inequality, how do we do things differently, how do we use year-round approach as a great innovation, which here you may take for granted, but to us it was the greatest innovation in terms of getting more students to go to school. And so you see the learning environment is changing. So in Africa, you have the double burden, and especially in Ghana, of making sure your education is fit for purpose. And then it fits for what purpose? The purpose of transforming your society, moving yourself from lower middle income to upper middle income, a Herculean task. I know Prof. Sachs has been talking about how do we do that. And in Ghana, we are taking a cue. We want to make sure that we are not creating a society where children do rote memorization in school, but a place where children are critical thinkers. TVET is an area that we are also making a major movement in terms of equipping our schools. Recently, somebody asked me in a radio interview, so it seems you're getting everything. Why is it that in Ghana, you've been able to get most of these things in your schools? It takes a sense of urgency. It takes a determined president. I'm so fortunate. I have a president who wants to change his country through education. So I literally get most of the things that I want. So I'm very lucky to be the education minister in Ghana. Even post-COVID, some great things have been done. I know my time is a bit gone. I just want you to know that transforming education in Ghana is a means to an end where our country will really see development in the next few years. We're going to see a different country. But I also want to tell you one thing. I left here for Ghana, and one thing I took with me was that idea, which some of you take for granted, that everything is possible. So I took that away to Ghana, and I believe that everything is possible, even in Africa, where there are limited resources. I'm grateful for the invitation.
Minister, do you want to stay with us? Or?
Oh, I can.
Yeah. We just want to probe your analysis.
Oh,
I know. Okay, so just to get, and that was inspirational, and I'm really convinced that the digital transformation can do so much for education and everything if it's applied. But this is great. So to save a bit of time, because we are under a bit of time pressure, right? I'm just going to very quickly just introduce the panel in their roles, and then I'll let you go first, just so we have the maximum time. So we have Dr. Mary Joy Pigosi, Executive Director of Education Child. That's you. So actually, just go for it. Anything that you like to say about Pact for the Future, education, anything that you have to get out.
Is this on? So thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity. For those of you that don't know... A little louder, please. Is it on?
Yeah, it's on.
Sorry, I have a quiet voice. But it doesn't mean that I'm not thoughtful or strong. For those of you that don't know, Educate a Child is based in a foundation called Education Above All. And we live in Qatar, and our focus is on the marginalized. Our goal is to focus on and to enable those that are the hardest to reach, those that have been left behind, to have an education. I think one of the challenges we find and fear is the inability of the education system to understand the barriers that children face. So rather than looking at education from the point of view of the school or the curriculum or the teacher or the policies, we really try to focus on the learner that's at the last mile, the one that has multiple barriers. Doesn't matter whether it's primary, secondary, higher. How do we address those barriers? And I was really moved to hear the minister speak to the barriers he moved. Understanding the barriers. And in that situation, what he shared with us, I'm sure it was more than 2 barriers, but he shared 2. If we don't focus on those barriers, we're never going to get education for all. And if we don't get education for all, our shared future is at risk. We heard in the earlier panel the sort of the consideration of philosophy and where the West is and versus the rest. And the bottom line is there isn't a West and the rest right now. We're in this together. And if we don't enable everyone that has the potential to have the opportunity to learn and to contribute, because with their contributions, we will benefit. And if we don't do that, our planet's lost. And I think the responsibility is on us. Unfortunately, it's been on us for decades. And as educators, we haven't done enough to really think about the learner versus our system and the things we know best. So we really need to turn it around. It's incredibly important that we use data, because I think if we look at much of the history and the history of the education system in the developing world, it's really based on assumptions about a whole different system that was grown in a whole different time in a different culture. So we really need, I think, to not think about reforming education, but really starting over and starting over fast. We have the tools with us. We have smart people, we have a lot of information, we have AI, we have technology, we have data. We have no excuse. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. So you asked for data, and you did. So we're going to have Dr. Andreas Schleiner, and he's the Director for Education Skills at the OECD, and we know him, obviously, because we all know the PISA scores, so this is what he brought to the world. So do you want to talk from the mic, or are you happy there?
I think if I see my slides, I will be happy from here.
Yeah. So we've got a little slide deck here that we'll watch.
Yeah, thank you very much. And if you think about educating people for the future, you want to help them keep this world in a better balance than we were able to do, but you will all... Sorry, my clicker does not... Maybe I have to switch it on. Is it... I don't know how... Yeah, now it seems to do something. No. Where is the computer where I need to point it to? Yeah, but it doesn't really move. No. Okay, I'll just show you when to click. Is that we do it the old way? Click once. If I tell you to click, please. Yeah. Click. That also doesn't seem to work. And at the same time, helping people to live in a world that is imbalanced. I think the aspect of resilience, I think, is increasingly important as well. Click. And we're trying to make those things measurable with our PISA assessments, putting numbers to this. Click. And the first thing is something that you probably know in one or the other forms. It relates basically the investments that we make per student on the horizontal axis to the quality of learning outcomes. In this case, it's mathematics on the vertical axis. And what you can see very clearly on the left side, just investing a little bit more money just gets you huge increases in outcomes. On the left side, you can see countries that are really strapped for cash and held back by this. At the same time, on the right side, you see countries where it actually makes relatively little difference how much you invest in education. Spending levers of, click once more. You can see, for example, the United States spends 10 times as much as Vietnam per student and gets pretty much the same outcomes now. If the world would find a little bit more rational way of distributing resources, we could give every child on this planet an excellent education. efficiency of Vietnam and some other countries combined, with their resources is actually something that really shows us something. If you click once more. And it has very little to do with the time that students spend in classrooms. You can see, click once more, students in Morocco spend 50 hours per week learning, either in school or with tutoring and whatever. Now, click once more, in Switzerland, it's just 30 hours per week. But click once more, when you look at productivity, you can see students in Switzerland learn a lot in very little time, whereas students in Morocco spend a lot of time and learn very little. And that actually is the second most important point, that it's not about volume, it's really about the quality of the instructional environment. Click once more, and you can really see the drivers behind it. When you have a lack of qualified teachers, you drive down results. Click once more, when you have a lack of assisting staff, you can just click through all of this lot, and you can see basically, finally I get a clicker that works. That's even better. Yeah, and it does work. And up to digital resources. Now, we know those drivers of success now. But, we're not talking and complaining about the education of today. We want to talk about the education of tomorrow. What do you expect from a good education? I think the first thing came out already in the previous session really well. You want to find out why you are here on this planet. Now, what is important to you? Now, you want to find out, where you can become really good at, where your talents are. And that's not a trivial question. How do you actually help students find out? You want to understand where you can make a difference in this world, what the world needs from you. And finally, not unimportant, you want to see how you can translate better skills into better jobs and better lives. So, very simple agenda, but when you start to actually look at this in numbers, it becomes complicated. I want to show you just a few results, just to put some flavor behind this. This is Japan. When you think about Japan, they always come out on top of international league tables, mathematics, science among the OECD countries. Very strong in terms of academic performance. And that's often all that we look at. But once you scratch the surface and look at some other dimensions, you can see, for example, the yellow bar, the dark yellow bar, orange bar is very short. Japanese kids are not particularly happy. They show actually very limited emotional resilience, little agency, being able to mobilize their cognitive, social, emotional resources, doing something. In this world of tomorrow, can you actually mobilize, do something? Very important. You can see basically a system that does well on something is not necessarily good at everything. And when we talk about the education of tomorrow, we have to take a broader view to what makes young people successful in tomorrow's world. I show you another example, which I also thought was really interesting. You think, well, the UK, US, they do all of these things better, no? But you can see the yellow bar is actually shorter. No? Academic success, less well developed. And the other bars are not much longer. No? British kids are as unhappy as the Japanese ones. No? They show a bit more agency, but you can see also emotional resilience, living in this imbalance world. Not much better developed. So we shouldn't just think, this is a Japanese problem. Actually, many education systems have very much focused on academic success and lost out on the social and emotional parts of success. Let me show you a third one. Last week I was in Ukraine, and you can see actually here the orange bar became very long. Why? Because in the middle of the war, this is a country that has thought, it's not enough to develop academic skills. We need to build relationships with our students. No? And Ukrainian kids in the middle of the war feel safer in their schools than American kids feel in their schools, according to our survey. No? Because safety in school has a lot to do with the quality of relationships, not just with the physical safety of the building. No? And those things actually can be developed, nurtured in an education system. No? But you can see also Ukraine has a lot of things to develop. No? You can look, the top country on these metrics is Denmark, actually. They get pretty much everything right. No? They do quite well academically. The yellow bar side, the Danish kids are happy, have a strong sense of belonging, identity, well-being. You can see they show a great sense of agency, being able to do things, because in school they do not just listen to things, they actually do things. I thought actually the example from Ghana was interesting in this as well. You can see they have great quality of social relationships, they pay attention to each other, they develop empathy, good social relationships. They're open to other ways of thinking, different perspectives, openness to diversity and so on. So it really shows us we can bring those things together. And I want to conclude just with one aspect, and this is very much in our mind. This is climate education. We surveyed 15-year-olds on this as well. You can say actually this is about OECD countries, so, but pretty much all 15-year-olds are very well aware of climate change, nuclear waste, forest clearing, and so you ask them questions of this, they are aware. When you ask them, are you optimistic that those problems can be solved, you can see the bars getting very short. You can see, clearing forests, plants, water shortage, nuclear waste. We can't fix those things. And that is, I think, an issue of agency. If we leave our world with a sense of pessimism that you can't address those things. But what drives it? You can actually look at this in detail. You can see actually whether you are interested in science or whether you expect to pursue a career in science doesn't make you, necessarily environmentally interested or interested in climate change. Even the people who are studying or want to study science are not necessarily interested in those kinds of sustainability issues. We can see, wealth is a driver, clearly. Gender is one, but the biggest driver is actually what kids know. That's a really, really important finding. It's not just, being aware and being, motivated by something, but we can clearly see kids that have learned something in school, that have a strong foundation in something like science, are much more, aware, and they actually also have a much more realistic appreciation of the challenges. The students who scored poorly in science were thinking, oh, well, tomorrow, there comes a magic politician who's going to sort out climate change. I don't need to change my behavior. Whereas students who had a better, knowledge foundation had a much more realistic appreciation of the challenges involved. And much more, you can see also they were much more willing to make a difference in this. And that's really why there's no shortcut to giving more people a better foundation if we want to see a more sustainable future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andreas. That was great. So I'm not sure, one of your slides resonated with me because when my kids come home with poor scorecards, I know I stand back and I go, but you're happy though, right? No, because it's too tough being a parent, right? They'll probably get your slide deck now. They'll let me know what it's all about. So, Jasmine Sharif. So I follow her on LinkedIn a lot, and it's very few LinkedIns that I wouldn't like. That's so that says something. So she's the executive director of Education Can't Wait, and given time constraints, I'm going to let you go first. Yeah, go first.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's working. I mean, usually I speak very loud anyway. I could speak without the microphone. Just a compliment. But first of all, I must thank everyone organizing this amazing conference and Professor Jeffrey Sachs in person. I told him I read every article he writes. I mean, I just get it in my inbox and I cannot stop reading it because there are very few voices like that out there. And it is what I call intellectual honesty. Intellectual honesty. And just being here, listening to all of you, I just feel so inspired. Wow, there's hope in this world. Oh, academia. Yeah, because I'm in the UN. Academia has to answer. I used to be in academia myself, but I've been in the UN for a long time. So I am the ex-director of Education Cannot Wait. We're a global fund for education in emergencies and crisis that was created by the former Prime Minister of the UK, UN Special Envoy for Global Education, Gordon Brown, at the World Humanitarian Summit. And the reason we were created was that education is sort of a development basic investment. And so often in humanitarian crisis, and you mentioned Gaza, Ukraine, well, the crisis now, you stop counting them. There are so many across the globe, the Sahel, Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, Afghanistan. I can't forget the continent, across the Middle East, that I think, sadly, with all the sources or or region of philosophy that comes from that part of the world is now in tatters. With so many crises and humanitarian responses, education was never prioritized. So the average investment in education, when you have a crisis like this that will last not 2 years or 1 year, but you look at Afghanistan, that's been going on since the late 70s actually. When people say it started in 81 or so, no, they're wrong. I was there in 1990, and then it been just concluded the first peace agreement, which did not last. It started with the invasion in the late 70s. So you look at Democratic Republic of Congo. I was just watching a movie when I went to Sweden. I'm half Swedish. Recently about Dag Hammarskjöld. I mean, he was out there in the 50s, 60s. Congo DRC did not start last year. We're speaking protracted crisis, generation after generation after generation losing out on an education. So that's why we were created. And today we have mobilized close to $2 billion, and we have invested in over 40 countries or regions or contexts where education, to give it a stronger, we advocate for that, to give it a stronger, a minimum of 10 to 20% of both the humanitarian and the development budget. So that's the background. We are a very fast-moving initiative in the UN system, and I think maybe because we are not part of UN Security Council. If we were, we would not exist. But we are a very non-political humanitarian development entity hosted by UNICEF, serving the whole UN and civil society, but most of all, the ministers of education. Since Ghana is stable, and I've been to Ghana, it's a lovely country, we aren't in Ghana. I'm sorry, you don't need us there. But we are across all countries where you have great ministers of education, but you just don't, you're working with an abnormal situation of armed conflict or climate-induced disaster, or you're hosting an enormous amount of refugees. Uganda has the biggest number of refugees in Africa, in the world, I guess. Pakistan, the same. Gaza, I don't have words anymore how to explain, because as Philippe Lazzarini said, the whole education system has been decimated. It doesn't even exist. Or Ukraine, where we started investing in 2017, well before the international community understood that Ukraine was the children of Ukraine were lacking out on education as a result of what was happening in the borders, or the girls in Afghanistan who have now been banned for the 3rd year from attending school beyond 6th grade. I mean, the cruelty, the lack of empathy, the lack of an understanding of what global responsibility means, the lack of peace building is probably the most urgent issues of our time. And that's why I believe we say that digitalization is important. Well, let me first say, because of the social inequity between the North and the South, there is no infrastructure in many of these countries to even have Wi-Fi. So that goes back to equity in how we distribute the resources around the globe. To go out in Mali, in the middle of nowhere, and say, here you have, iPad, learn. The issues are much bigger and broader than this. We are speaking about an absolute social inequity on a planet where we have so many resources available. This is a wealthy planet, but it's not managed with responsibility or moral responsibility. And that's where the problem is. And that's where philosophy comes in. And I used to do philosophy before I did human rights law. And I think the philosophy is probably one of my most fascinating subjects, but it ties you to human rights law as well. It sort of builds into one another. I think philosophy, peace building, ethics, and ethical politics, empathy, responsibility for, in a sense of solidarity for the world, These are the things that the new generation needs in their classroom. These are the things we need to put at the top of their curriculum. Because if life is just about getting rich, but not having wealth inside you, you're really poor. It doesn't matter how much money you have, okay? And if you are having a great, comfortable life where there are children without limbs, without parents, I wouldn't be able to say I'm happy when I come home with my bad grades. So I think it is we need to revive. Today, everything is about an attention span of 20 seconds on Twitter. It's not the philosophical thinking when you really sit down like the ancient Greeks and ask yourself, know thyself, which is the old Greek ancient axiom, where you study yourself, you study your environment, you try to connect the dots, and there's a strong sense of morality and ethics and virtue. And I noted that virtue was being discussed. And I think it's very important when we discuss virtue and morality, because we are living in this world with many different religions, many different ethnicities, and no one has monopoly over any righteousness over the other. And I was very lucky to grow up in Sweden where religion was a subject. So we learned about all world religions and offsprings of different major religions. So I don't have a problem. But I know people have problems with religion. And they make it a huge issue to the extent that they can go and kill for it. Anyway, so I think these are where we need to focus. Change first of all, take responsibility so that everyone has availability of an infrastructure that gives them the digital learning. But as Martin Luther King said, we have advanced technically, but we haven't advanced spiritually. Go back, focus on philosophy, peace building, open up to learn about different cultures, different religions, teach tolerance. Because we know that those that are at war today, and that's not just one part of the globe as opposed to another. As a matter of fact, there is one part of the globe where trillions of dollars are invested in war. And then a few $100 million are invested in education for the rest of the globe. It is, if they invested all those trillions of dollars instead of in the killing machinery, in education for everybody, and we wouldn't have the differences that you mentioned between European countries and countries in Africa, we could restore digital learning, but it is the subjects of empathy, compassion, ethics, ethical politics, responsibility. We need a change of consciousness in the new generation. They are our hope. It's the young people that are our hope. It's very difficult to teach an old dog to sit. Thank you.
I hated imposing a clock there, given your good points about the 2 minutes on Twitter. So, Ilan Everga. So I was actually trying to pin you down in terms of your young K-12 educator, SDG advocate from the Philippines, and I was trying to work out which committee were you on, like the SDG4 steering group or the Youth Declaration for Transforming Education, and I went through about 10 more, and he said, yeah, I'm on all of them. So you take the floor and tell us what you think of the Youth Declaration or the Pact for the Future.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. I'm glad that we're talking about education. I'm glad that we're talking about youth and future generations. I'm glad that I'm on a panel with fellow youth as well. And I'm in a room full of young people. I believe so. Everyone agree? Yeah? Yes. That's all that counts. But I first wanted to thank, again, the organizers, SDSN, and Professor Sachs for the invitation. It's really an honor to be here, and also with these panelists. As Paul mentioned, I wear quite a few hats, and it would take forever to explain all of them, so I will not. But all of the hats happen to perfectly align with the theme of this panel, which is on youth and education. So by practice, I am a practitioner, I'm a teacher, I'm a school leader, I'm a teacher trainer. A lot to do with 4.7, so it's good to be in a room full of similar, like-minded people. And I do a lot to sort of empower children, young people, students in K through 12 to, take agency, to have empathy for people and planet. And I'm happy to talk more about that later on. But I think what I'd like to emphasize on is that while I work as a practitioner at a local level, I have something that I have a privilege to also be exposed and be in spaces that are also regional and international and actually influencing policy. Because I think a lot of us can agree that there's a big disconnect between practice and policy. There's a big disconnect between practitioners and policymakers. And again, I feel very privileged that I am able to access these spaces. So I am part of the UNESCO SDG 4 Youth and Student Network. So I do work heavily with the UNESCO headquarters in Paris, with a team of young people all over the world who are not just young advocates who are protesting on the streets. They are practitioners, they are policymakers, they are researchers, they are academics, they are amazing people that I'm very proud to work with. And through that, I am also the youth representative on the SDG 4 High-Level Steering Committee. So that is the ministerial committee that is chaired by the President of Chile, President Boric, and the Director General of UNESCO, Audrey Azoulay. So it's a committee, a cross-sectoral, a really great example of what we'd like to see done more in education systems. Is, there's representation from government, from private sector, from civil society, from teachers, and from young people. And that's really how we should be making decisions when it comes to education. So again, I'm from the Philippines, and I'm no stranger to the poly crisis that we are all experiencing in our planet. Poverty is extremely high, inequality is extremely high, and being in the Pacific Ring, we're no stranger to climate-related disasters. So I know we started off our first day yesterday with kind of a little opening remarks from Professor Sachs with a little bit of pessimism, but no worries, Professor Sachs, we don't blame you. It's the truth, and it's the honest truth, and that's what we appreciate. But because I work as a young person in education, so I really dabble with youth and education, I feel like I literally work in the industry of hope, because as a teacher, I think every day is a practice of hope. You never know what your students will take from what you tell them on that day. But because I also work with young people, I think we can all agree that young people are literally the hope for our future. So although we're dealing with so many challenges and problems and systems that really are not supporting solutions that need to tackle these problems, I feel very hopeful every day, because young people are absolutely not just deserving of having a seat at the decision-making table when it comes to education systems. Young people are true leaders and champions of education transformation. It's something I often say. I hope you are not tired of hearing it, but we will keep saying it because we're still waiting for that necessary systemic change to happen. But nothing about us without us, right? We can't talk about young people without young people. We can't have a panel on youth and future generations without actually having youth and having their voices heard. And the key recommendation I just wanted to cite, and that is very relevant to the Pact of the Future, that is very relevant to what is happening right now at the United Nations headquarters. If you're all aware, the action days are happening right now that are all youth-led. And again, just like amazing young people over there, I think maybe somewhere in this room, but amazing young people are really, literally leading the change that we need in our systems. And the Pact of the Future has I think there's the latest version was published yesterday. And there are some improvements when it comes to mentioning education. There are also great points there. I think Action 36 and Action 37 on the Pact of the Future are already citing meaningful youth engagement in decision-making at a national level and international level. So we're very happy about that. But again, it's just a question of, why do young people deserve to have a seat at the decision-making table? It's not just because young people are going to inherit the future that we are all talking about at the Summit of the Future. It's also because young people are the present change makers in our education systems. Every time I have a chance to have a microphone, I I feel the responsibility of speaking up not just for myself, but for all young people. That's literally what I have to do on the high-level steering committee. I have to represent 1.9 billion people. And being here, I carry with me a lot of young change makers in education. One being Ajmal Ramyar, who leads a youth-led organization in Afghanistan, who literally constructed an elementary school for displaced children in northern Afghanistan. I'm here with Juliet, who is a young PhD researcher and CEO of a nonprofit organization who empowers autistic individuals of all age levels. And lastly, May Asagba, who founded a nonprofit at age 21 for disadvantaged African children and giving them free access to quality education. These are just 3 young people who are transforming education on the ground. These are the practitioners that need a seat at the table. These are the practitioners we need with policymaking. And we are here, we are reminded who we are doing this work for. We're reminded who we are transforming education for. But now let's remind ourselves who we need to transform education with. Thank you.
Thank you. So, I'm looking at, so are we wrapping up or? Q&A. So I did want to give you a chance to respond, but we'll take any questions out there. Go ahead.
Wrong place to. Hi, can you hear me? Hi. Well, thank you, first of all, for everything. My name is Frederico. I'm with the Open Society Foundations, and I oversee the higher education portfolio there. This was amazing. I have 2 notes. Maybe I should do it. First is to Dr. Schleicher, if this slide is available. I know there's so much available on the PISA, but I've never seen anything this synthetic and this compelling presented. So if this could be shared somehow, that this would be amazing. And to Minister Osei, I will be in Ghana in 2 weeks, and I would really appreciate to meet with members of your cabinet if possible. But my question to the panel, and maybe this goes to Dr. Pigosi, who works with Gardner Brown. I worked previously with Mark Malloch Brown for some time. And one discussion we always had, in the international development space and educational policy spaces, there's still a lagging misconception that investing in education is always a zero-sum game. So if you're investing in education, especially basic education, you're cutting from somewhere else in the budget, right? And that applies to national governments, local governments, and international development, right? And one particular thing that scares me and annoys me a lot is that if you invest in basic education, you're cutting from higher education. So the 2 things are thought in opposition, as if and not in unison or as complementary investment. So I just wanted you to comment on that. In a time that basically we've been listening from philosophy and we need to learn new ways of living in the world. How do you see this question? Sorry.
So maybe I'll collect Lanray. I'll just collect 2 more and then we'll answer. Okay.
Thank you very much. I think the presenters have done a great job. But my questions are just 2, and because I'm actually looking for solutions. The first question has to do with security matters. And I think finding solutions to security issues goes beyond what teachers, at times what these policymakers can do. Especially, I'm using Nigeria as a case study because I'm from Nigeria, where you have students and teachers being kidnapped. It then means that nobody wants to send his or her child to school. So I'm looking for solutions. The second has to do with the presentation by His Excellency, the Honorable Minister. I really like your presentation. But I'm also coming from a background, Nigeria, for example. Opening up like that means that we also require resources and teachers at a very short time, in a very short time. I'm wondering how you are able to manage both quantity and quality at the same time, because if you then want to employ more teachers, then it may mean that one needs to reduce the quality or the time spent in teacher training. The biggest one of all is funding. Funding is still a big issue. How can we resolve funding of these schools? Thank you very much.
Maybe just one more. That was 3 questions. Okay, we'll go for it, Helen. Yeah.
Aloha Vinlina Kako. My name is Kino Hisuki, and I'm a 15-year-old from Hawaii. I'm a student at Kamehameha Schools. I'm a sophomore in high school, as well as a member of the SDG Youth Council. And, I've heard a lot about, philosophy, policy, and science scores, but I want to know, where does culture and where do values tie into this type of curriculum?
Okay, that's a good question.
Okay, I'll just make it quick. This is Daisuke Kimura. I'm from Japan, where the people lower self-esteem and the lower resilience. I just wanted to ask a very quick question, but everybody mentioned education is very important, we agree, and investment on like a transformative education, that everybody agrees, but it's not really happening. So what would be the more relevant and convincing strategies to make it possible to transform, to grow the leader like Ilya? Yes, this is the quick question.
Okay, so the budgetary one. I think you were jumping up. Do you want to get that? That's the easy one.
Oh, okay. I think the basic education and investment. Now, the big movement towards what is called foundational learning, and so much resources are being poured into that area. And as if when you do foundational learning, you don't look at other issues, which is more secondary and tertiary. But in the development community, that's what we see all the time. You meet a foundation and they say, no, we don't do high school. We only focus on basic, or we only focus on the primary school level. And so the challenge that you have is to make sure that in your national budget regime, you have a balance. So it shouldn't be a situation where for me to improve my basic schools, I have to cut from higher ed. But there has to be a balance, because what we realized in Ghana is this: there was so much investment into basic schools and basic education, and then we realized that some parents were not even too much interested, because in their mind it was to a dead end. If you are investing in primary school for me, but my child cannot go to secondary, I don't have a motivation for even sending him to school or her to school, because after the primary school, they can't go anywhere. So if you don't maintain a balance and you think, oh, primary education investment is so important, in developing countries, when you go there, focus on primary education, then you do all the primary, and then parents are not even interested because they know that after primary they have nothing. So I think the balance is so critical, because investment in higher education, secondary education, can serve as a motivator for parents to invest their effort in primary education. So I think the balance is important. And then you talk about, issues about requiring resources and teachers. And in the case of Ghana, we happen to have oversupply of teachers. So we don't have a problem at all. If you want to recruit 10,000 teachers, 100,000 will apply. In fact, some countries are now recruiting from Ghana, especially UK. So we don't have teacher shortage. So when we started the free secondary education, we just hired more teachers to complement the staff that we had. And so getting more teachers to teach in the sciences, there's no shortage in Ghana, so we don't have that. But the question also becomes funding. But I'll tell you this, there's a raging battle in Ghana. People are saying that, why should secondary be free? We are investing so much in it. And other people are saying, we better do it now. And you see that for a politician, I mean, I do policy, I'm a techno-politician. I do more technocrat issues. But I think that if a politician wants to spend in an area like education, don't ask him to stop. And that's what the president of Ghana is saying. When people say, why are you spending all this? And you have people, news media people, accusing him of spending a fortune on education. And then his answer is, if I had not spent this money the last 7 years, you think it would be sitting somewhere? So he took our oil resources and spent it on secondary education because he thinks that is the best investment. That instead of keeping the money and not knowing how to guarantee where the money goes to, invest it in education. So I think a sense of urgency sometimes allows some funding resources to be made available for education. So I will not worry about funding first. If there's a greater sense of urgency, we'll find the money. And I think there was something about, the one important thing is in terms of culture and values, one area that I've seen that we haven't leveraged on very well is what in education we call the hidden curriculum. Because you will not be able to teach every single thing in your education system. But you can use the hidden curriculum to do more than the explicit curriculum. What are the values in the school? These children are sitting at our feet, beginning from kindergarten to high school. What books did we select for them to read for English literature? The stories in the books may mold their minds to become the kind of people that we want them to be, without necessarily teaching a course in values and teaching a course in culture. So I think we need to really, really look at the hidden curriculum and look at how you get to that destination. And it's easier for somebody like me with education background, when we're doing a curriculum review, I made sure climate change issues, there are units in the curriculum. If you access the Ghanaian curriculum, you're going to see that issues of the environment is there, all the things that people talk about and say, why are we not doing this? We have a rare opportunity. And I think I was at the right place at the right time, that we could infuse such things into our curriculum.
And there's a very good course, The Ages of Globalization, that would be good for that hidden curriculum.
Great. Amazing panel, of course, of real champions across the board. I'd like to ask Dr. Osei, I was going to ask a different question about the budget. What would you do if you had twice the budget, given your real situation right now? Because that's what we'd like to get for you. And second, could you just explain a little bit more about how come the teachers were available already? Because this is a general question across Africa right now for scaling up. Is that true in most places? Was that specific to Ghana? How would you see that?
Yeah, if I have twice the budget, it would be a great day for Ghana. Yeah, because I can shift the education from humanities to the STEM-related fields and actually do STEAM to have a holistic kind of education. And also, I believe that we cannot educate 21st century children in 19th century buildings and expect 21st century outcomes. I mean, you can have schools under trees and buildings are falling apart and you're telling yourself, I can still make them the best in the world. It's not going to happen. So I was fortunate. When I became the Minister for Education, by the way, I was a deputy before that, but I became minister, I went to the World Bank. They had already given us some funds to transform education in Ghana, and I told them, I need part of the money to be dedicated to school buildings. Yeah. And now you're going to see some beautiful school buildings that we've done, and it has even given us a rare opportunity to cut down the cost of education. Because what is happening is that in villages and towns, you may have 7 junior high schools. And each one of them had their own mathematics teacher, their own English teacher. Now, when I go to a town, a mid-sized town, I put one huge facility that takes 1,200 students. I cut down the number of teachers needed by 40%. Because the teacher-student ratio in the junior high schools in Ghana is 1:12. Every school has a math teacher. Therefore, a school with 50 students have 13 teachers. So I'm using the infrastructure overhaul to drive a major reorganization of our junior high school system. Put it at a place where in a village with a town with 841 students, a mid-sized town, 841 students, they have 84 teachers. Because the Methodist school has its own math teacher, the Anglican school has their own mathematics teacher. Therefore, in most of the schools, teachers go to school and they don't have enough students to teach. In junior high schools, you teach on Monday, you wait till Wednesday. You're doing part-time work for full-time pay because of how you have developed your infrastructure. So we moved the buildings, and these are some of them. we are moving the buildings into 21st century, equip junior high schools with biology, chemistry, physics labs, and at the same time reduce the number of teachers in such a way that I reduce the cost. In fact, the mathematics shows that in 15 years, the reduction in the teacher force can help me pay for the building. Wow. So the building is giving us quality education, but I'm rationalizing deployment of teachers in such a way that I'm saving on 40% in any town where I built this. So it's a win-win all around. But it takes reorganization, rethinking, then to be able to do what people thought was impossible, reducing cost of education per child.
So, delighted always, and hopefully we'll be in Dubai together, and we'll create that viral video. Maybe this one will go viral as well. You never know. And everyone else was absolutely excellent on the data and the values and motivations, and the youth voice. And I'm glad we do have one youth in the room, and we have two actually. So, so thank you, and we get on to the next panel. Really? They kept on telling me they had no time. Okay, so let's go then.
I would like you. Yeah. I mean, I think going backward, I think it was a very important question raised by our friend from Hawaii. And it's about culture and education. And that takes us also back to human rights. And I always say, if you really want to make sure that people don't access the human rights or get a tool to access the human rights or stand up for the human rights or know their culture, make sure that they don't get an education. That's the best way to repression. Or to use culture to destroy another culture. Cultural identity is so important. It's part of a child's development. But it's also important, and that's why human rights are so important, and that's why I think it goes back to value system. What is virtue? Human rights are virtue. You can be whoever you want. You can relate to universe whatever way you want, as you don't hurt another human being. And I think that's the bottom line of virtues, the right to respect culture, religion, and so forth. So that's a very important question, because we know that the destruction of culture is also about destroying people and their history. I want to say something very quickly about the costs of education. Do you choose education, or how was raised by our colleague from UK over there? I think there are two levels of this. One is globally, what do we do with the resources that exist? And the UN came out with a report a couple of years ago. The $2.1 trillion go into the war machinery. $2.1 trillion in 2022, I think. It's probably gone up much more now. And at Education Cannot Wait, we are really happy that we have raised 1.8 billion and to cover 224 million children, and we have reached 11 million only so far. What is that compared to $2.1 trillion? So at international level, how are you making your decisions on where we investing as a human family? And that's very important, because I often see in my work, and here I have to be, I often see the international aid community going to the ministers of education in Africa and the Middle East. Oh, you have to invest more in education. And then comes the minister of education in Chad. Yeah, but I need to make sure we have safe border, because we have a lot of wars around there, and we have massive amount of refugees coming. And if I don't safeguard some security here, the refugees cannot feel safe here. The problem is not the ministers of education in the global south, or even sometimes their own whole of government approach. The problem is that so many wars are created on the continent that security becomes a survival mechanism. So I do always put the responsibility, and I've had these discussions many times, discussing many wars and conflicts in the Middle East and Africa. The strongest one is the one that must first bend and take responsibility. Don't go to the ones who are the victims of your neocolonialism, the victims of your deprivation of their minds and DRC, and tell them how to behave. What is your role in this? So I think at the Education Cannot Wait, we are just there to serve the Minister of Education in all these countries. And if others want to remind them that they should invest more in education, we remind them that they should invest less in wars to create these problems for the Global South. Thank you.
Encore. So I just want to pick up again on the issue of accountability. We try to hold children, learners, teachers, and ministries of education accountable for what's happening in education. It's bigger than that. And I think we actually don't in education have very good mechanisms for looking at accountability. So that I think is something we could work on together, because if we don't, the kinds of things that Yasmin is talking about don't get attended to. And a lot of accountability does come to data, and it's very uncomfortable data. It's who's doing what to whom with what. And that's the kind of thing that nobody wants to actually admit. So I think, one, it's really important to look at accountability. The second point I want to talk about is the minister talked a little bit about the hidden curriculum. There's part of the curriculum that's not hidden at all, but we don't focus on it. And that is that a lot of what we learn is what we see and hear and experience around us. It's how the classroom is run, how the school is run, how the community is run, how the sports program is run. Does it include both genders? Are we respectful of people who are different? All of that is part of education, and when we talk about education generally, we do not talk about that whole human context, cultural context. That is an important part of education that, in fact, unfortunately, the foundational learning folks pretty much have lost. They're focusing on a few knowledge, and knowledge is important, we have to have it. Information is important. But what's really important, and the older kids get, the more important it is that they learn to be flexible, that they learn to take in different kinds of information and analyze it. And based on what they know, make decisions, which is the issue that Andreas raised about really what we have in terms of agency, because that is really important. And finally, just to talk very quickly about investment, it's hugely important. It's bigger than we are right now, but there are means to do this. There are ways to look at the debt problem. We are exploring a lot of work on debt relief and debt relief for education. That needs to happen. We're looking also, and the colleagues at Columbia, particularly Professor Sachs, can talk more to this, about really the importance of understanding the long-term investment in education and how that pays back in spades. It's done that in the wealthy countries. We haven't allowed it to happen in the poor countries because they're too indebted to do it. And we really need to take that on. Thank you. Sorry.
You know, I mean, for humans, it's always hard to make, good trade-offs between the present and the future. I mean, this is what this discussion is about. And so I think getting more overall investment in education is hard to justify, hard to make the choice. But I think we can, even within the resources that the world spends on education, achieve just so much more. And we can learn from the climate movement, actually. Think about the global carbon tax. We figured out that it does make a lot more sense to invest, money in a place where it has bigger return than, if we did that in education, we look at the global resources invested in education, we invest it a bit more smartly, where it can make most of a difference. We would have a different world. And some countries have done that, quite well locally. The 10% most disadvantaged students in the region of Shanghai in China have the same mathematics scores in the 10% wealthiest in the United States. Think about it for a moment. How do they do that? They attract the most talented teachers in the most challenging classrooms. They do know that actually putting the resources where you can actually have the largest leverage, you're going to achieve much better turnout. And I think if we applied those kinds of mechanisms locally, regionally, globally, we would solve a lot of problems. And the second, take the example of Ghana, actually. If Ghana would raise outcomes, performance of its student population just to the baseline level on PISA. That is not, the top, it's just the baseline. That would be worth 40 times the size of the Ghanaian economy today. 40 times, 4-0. No? And in a way, I think borrowing money on the future, as you do in a way, I think, making spending choices today that you recuperate later, I think is another way of how we could actually leverage a lot more resources. And but I want to also, comment briefly on the question from our Japanese colleague, because I think that's another issue that we face. We are so much better in educating kids for our past than for their future. And part of the reason is that, we are, holding our systems prisoners to, exams that are built and mirrored on past or the institutional interests of the present. And it's very, very hard to change that dynamic. And as a policymaker, you can lose an election when something small goes wrong in education. You're not going to win an election over education because, the fruits of great things you do today are not going to be seen in your life. And that's just the political economy of that is really, really hard. But I think as societies, we can make a difference to that. I think if we, put a bit more emphasis on the future rather than the present, we would do so much better on the climate front. We would do so much better on the education front.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, there's really great questions, and I wish we could answer all of them. Happy to talk after this session as well. But the topic of education financing has been number one at the high-level steering committee. So what's really great is right after the Summit of the Future, the first sort of high-level event is the G20, and parallel to that is the Global Education Meeting. So both are happening in Fortaleza next month. And we've had many talks about issues with financing and sort of proceeding to more innovative financing mechanisms, looking at debt swaps. But I really have to credit our His Excellency Dr. Osei from the Ministry of Education of Ghana, because it's not, yes, absolutely number one, we need to increase our budgets. We need to at least reach the minimum of 15% in domestic revenue for education in our national budgets. But just the efficiency and the strategic, how you spend the money, that is also a wonderful untapped just strategy that is not being used. And I think just to also address the question from Japan, from Gift, is that we need to, it does feel like we are talking in an echo chamber when it comes to education and education financing. We really need to get ministers of finance in the room. We need to get ministers of finance when we talk about education and when we talk about the future. Thank you.
I just want to make a quick comment about the benchmarks for financing and the returns to education. It is a commonplace in economic growth analytics that the returns to education are enormously high. They take 25 years to realize, or 30 years to realize. You take a young child, you have to put the child through university. That's the aim. And the returns, if you calculate it, are typically above 20% compound annual rate of return. So the argument is not whether this is a good economic investment. it is an investment outside of the politician's electoral cycle. But it is the highest return that society has, actually. It's better than investing in Apple or Amazon or others. It's more than 20% compound return. It's the only way that a society can develop, the only way. Now, all of our benchmarks are wrong, like 15% of the budget or 20% of the budget or 4% of GDP or 5% of GDP. It all depends on how many children in the population, what is the cost of teachers relative to the average salary, and what is the infrastructure needs. If you do it that way rather than a slogan, you might end up with 10 to 15% of GDP, not of the budget. So you might end up at 50% of the budget or 75% of the revenues. What's the implication of that? Not that it's impossible or you've done the calculation wrong, but that you may need to finance a significant increment in another way, like a 40-year low-interest loan, for example. A 40-year low-interest loan for education is an excellent investment. If it's 40 years so you don't get stuck in a debt trap in 5 years or 10 years, the child's only going to be in 10th grade by then. They're not going to be boosting the government revenues. But if you give 40 years, you've got a completely new economy on your hands. This is what has been rejected or not analyzed by the gatekeepers, say the IMF or the World Bank gatekeepers who do the debt sustainability. They don't have a 40-year framework. They literally have a 10-year framework. I don't mean figuratively, I mean literally. They cannot compute the benefits of education financing with the tools that they use because they're asking the question about the debt ratio 5 to 10 years. So unless we understand this is the best investment, but it's a long-term investment, and we have to tell the politicians it's a long-term investment, you will have the monument to you in 50 years. You may not win re-election, but you will have the monument to you for having created the modern economy. And what we need to tell the parents is this is the best thing that can happen for your children, because there's no path out of poverty for your children, even for your children to support you in your old age, unless they're educated in the 21st century economy. And one of the brilliant things about the East Asian economies, all of whom are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on the top of the PISA scale, is that the parents are going mad for their kids' education. This is really so essential. And so this is another part of the story. This isn't a nice thing or a burden. Oh, we got to send the kid to school for another 4 years because the president said so. This is the best thing that can happen to the family. So I think we just need this understanding very deeply, and we need also to, when you're on these committees, tell them they don't even do the arithmetic right, and if they want my spreadsheet, I'll share it with them. Really, and the other thing I would really like is that every single country should be in PISA, because we need the standardized assessments all over the world, because what Andreas has created is monumentally good and important. And when you get a low score, it's a lesson. It's not a punishment. It's a spur. And I was just in Mexico. They didn't like their low scores, so they canceled being part of PISA for a while. I don't know if they're back or not. They're back. But, you know, that's exactly the wrong thing to do. The right thing to do is to say, oh, I came out at the bottom. We need to double our budget. We need to change the curriculum. So my goal is that all 193 UN member states are part of PISA as soon as we can possibly do that.
I think this is the closing remarks. So powerful. But the only thing is the PISA. one of the things that Ghana, we preparing to go to PISA. But I also realized that we have to look at our local assessment regime. Invariably, we think that in education we have what we call CIA, curriculum, instruction, and assessment. So we do that so well. But what we fail to understand is that assessment comes first. The outcome that we want, the product the student have to create. You are looking at how to solve certain mathematical equations. Then you work your way backwards to look at, is the curriculum covering that, and how am I going to teach it? About 6 months ago, I had a meeting with the West Africa Examination Council. They are the one who examine all students in Anglophone West Africa. And people see them as an international organization. But I called them to my office and I said, we have a new curriculum at the junior high school level. Give me a table of specification as to the level of difficulty of the questions that are going to come on this exam. So I popped up on my screen in my office the new Bloom's taxonomy. And I took them through it. The level 1, which is remembering, on a particular subject, 20 of the questions out of 40 were on remembering. Understanding had 10 questions. So that gives you, between understanding and remembering, have 30 questions out of 40. And application was 10. Nothing on the exams was coming from level 4, 5, and 6. So what did that mean? What it meant, it would have meant for the country was that the following year, the teachers were not going to use critical thinking. They will not have to design lesson plans at 4, 5, and 6, because the exams is just level 1, 2, and 3. So I told them, you go back. And I said, this is a case where the tail is wagging the dog. We have created a national curriculum that says we will have critical thinkers. And I said, I've even gone to United Nations to talk about we can't memorize our way out of poverty, but we can critically think. and this has gone viral. Then in my own country, there's nothing critical thinking about exams. So they took it back, and they came back 2 weeks thereafter. Now I was so happy, because 40% of the questions were from level 4, 5, and 6, assuring me that nobody was going to get an A if they could not think. But they were shocked that the education minister said the question should be difficult. But I also felt the investment we are making in education is to produce critical thinkers. And if our system is not producing them, our education is worthless. So now I'm so happy. And to validate that, I went to Nigeria and I met the Ghana's High Commissioner to Nigeria who had lived in India. And the wife is a teacher in Ghana. So he said, Ghana, what happened this year? Your exams has changed. I said, what's going on? He said, my wife called me and told me that the Ghana's exam is just like that of India this year. So I was so happy. I got a validation. So for us to do well on PISA, you have to look at your national assessment. See, so if you go to PISA and don't do well, you are not PISA-like. So in our national standardized test, we brought psychometrists from Australia. They look at the PISA exams, and they incorporated a number of PISA-like questions to make it PISA-like. So if they do on the national exams, it tells me we can go to PISA and we'll be able to do it. We want to conquer the world, but we are starting.
So thank you very much. So we just want to get a picture. So Jeffrey, I think they want you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stay in your seats. We're going to transition to the next session, which is the Siemens Gamesa Award Ceremony. I'm very pleased to welcome to the stage Ms. Maria Cortez Puch, who is the Vice President of Networks for SDSN. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Ms. Maria Cortez Puch, Vice President of Networks. Thank you. Everyone, please take your seats. We're transitioning to the next session. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to ask you to take your seats.
Goodbye to Jasmine. I was with her in Afghanistan.
Oh, okay.
The special
I thought
thing.
you were
It was a long time ago.
Okay.
It was still Najibullah's time.
Oh, wow. All right, there are a few pictures being taken, but we need to start the next session.
Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Thanks so much.
You have the war experience, so this is getting... Okay, we're going to start the next session.
I just want to quiet people down.
Yeah.
Could people come back to the seats? More wonderful things to come. So people, please come back to your seats.
Great. So I'm going to introduce the next session. We continue in the pack of youth mobilization, and we are today starting the ceremony for our Universities for Goal 13 program. I think it's still quite loud, no? Okay, I think we can go on now. So, Universities for Goal 13 is a 12-month process where SDSN partners with Siemens Gamesa. This is our third year, and it starts late September. And it starts late September when we select 5 extraordinary universities from around the world, and we make a call for students to identify a challenge related to climate change in their communities and design an innovative solution that thinks about sustainable development and in all of its dimensions. So these tend to be projects that are really interdisciplinary. Now, today we're going to be announcing the winning solution. As I said, it's a process of 12 months where students go through a number of rounds of selections. So they are evaluated several times. And I think what makes this project quite unique is that they also go through a very sophisticated period of mentoring. This mentoring process is done by our colleagues from Siemens from around the world. So they spend time working with the students in their solution and trying to get their projects improved or to the next level. This year we worked with 5 extraordinary universities: Monash University in Australia, PUC Rio from Brazil, the Chinese University in Hong Kong, Southampton University in the UK, as well as Case Western in the US. Before I bring our speakers to the podium and we announce the winning solution, I want to acknowledge the 5 projects that reached this phase, because we had many more, so only 5 of them arrived to this stage, and they focused on topics such as upcycling textile and plastic waste into eco-friendly products, or repurposing offshore oil platforms for wind energy and green hydrogen production. Now, the videos of the 5 projects that arrived to this stage will be made available as of today in our website. Before I pass the floor to Jeff again, I want to thank our partner. So thank you so much to Siemens Gamesa for this enormous project and for this road together. Head of Sustainability, Maximilian Schneebering, who will be joining us shortly, has been an extraordinary advocate for this program and a great intellectual guide for the students. And of course, Rocío Millán is the project lead that makes everything work. I also want to thank the mentors that spend so much time with these students. I know from talking to them, talking to the student, that this is a phenomenal experience for them, but also for the students. And I want to thank also our focal points in each of these universities, as well as the evaluating committee, a team of professionals from different organizations who were instrumental in the success of this competition. Finally, I thank Marta García Aro and Raquel Armendariz, who have been our project leads in SDSN. So Jeff, welcome to the stage.
Well, just to say to our friends at Siemens Gamesa, this is such a wonderful model program. I think it should inspire great companies all over the world. It's the perfect win-win as far as I can see, because first you have a great company that is mentoring students, so for the students it's phenomenal. But the students are making great projects, to be frank about it. They're doing it at 0 price, because they're graduate students. That's their assignment. And they're part of a fun competition, and they're superb. So the students are wonderful. The mentorship is incredibly powerful. It's the hands-on engineering knowledge and technical knowledge that students need to know in a complicated but feasible program that they're working on. So I love this project. And I'm most grateful to Siemens Gamesa, and I want to hear who won, actually, because each year it's very exciting, and it's a wonderful team. So that's all I wanted to say, is a huge thank you and an encouragement to others to follow in this lead, because we've got lots of students around the world in our network. And if we have a company that will do mentorship, that is technically oriented, looking for solutions, and wants to do the mentorship, which is also fun, but it's a great way to find your future colleagues as well, then please connect. You can learn from us. I'm sure that the Siemens Gamesa team would be delighted also to share experiences, but I really do encourage it in a serious way, because I think it's an absolutely wonderful program that you've pioneered. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And let me welcome now Maximilian Schneebering, who is the head of sustainability at Siemens Gamesa Renewable Energy, working on the improvement of the environmental and social footprints along the whole value chain. He holds a PhD from the School of Business, Economic and Social Science of the University of Hamburg. And he is engaged in Siemens Wind Power, analyzing the social and environmental impacts of supplier during the life cycle of a wind turbine. Maximilian, thank you so much.
Thank you. And I brought the envelope.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really pleased to be once again here with you this year to present to you Universities for Goal 13, which, as we just heard, is a global challenge of students around the world coming together to fight against climate change also. And we also need to share a hard truth these days. We are in a recession, a sustainability recession. Companies, governments all over the world reconsider their sustainability targets because it takes a lot of investment, time, money, resources, if you really want to implement sustainability. But isn't this the case for everything we do at the end? Infrastructure, education we just heard, corporate development. We need to invest and we want to invest because it will create value. And the same is true if we think about sustainability. It will also create value. We are strong believers that there is a business case for sustainability and that it will provide value to us and foster our competitiveness and your competitiveness. So therefore, let's really focus also on implementing smart policies that integrate sustainability into economic recovery plans, promote investments in greener technology. Let's promote education and public-private partnerships. This sounds like what we are celebrating today, the Universities for Goal 13. Also here, we bring together innovation, public-private partnerships, and education. And we just heard students around the world, Australia, Brazil, China, the UK, the US, they all developed their own solutions how to solve and how to achieve SDG 30. And one of the key highlights I would like to share with you also is that almost all finalists, all the projects were led by women. This is really an outstanding achievement in a STEM-related initiative that shows we are on the right path, leveraging full potentials also. And someone told me earlier today that during the semi-final pitches, there was a feedback from one of the jury members that the project is really great, but quite forward-looking and not matching really the reality of the country these days, so it will take many years until really impact capitalizes. And the project lead, she replied, maybe yes, but we need to be ready because the day will come. And I think that shows the spirit of the next generation. So let's be on the right side of history, let's also be ready, and let's continue to promote sustainability. Now, the exciting moment. I opened already, secretly here. So, the first prize of the third edition for Universities for Goal 13 is awarded to the team composed by Beatrice, Laura, Enzo, Gustavo, Joao Victor, Katsuo, Maria Vittoria, and Pedro. And they are all from the PUC University, Rio, from Brazil. Congratulations to the team. Their solution is called OG2OW, so recommissioning oil and gas platforms to offshore wind energy. Let's watch their solutions video now.
Our planet is calling for help. The consequences of climate change are becoming increasingly evident, and we need to act quickly to preserve our future.
Since 1992, conventions, agreements, and agendas have been proposed and signed, establishing international cooperation to tackle the technical and political challenges of greenhouse gas emissions.
Although much has been done, we still have a long way to go. Oil and gas production remains a major player in many energy matrices. In Brazil, offshore oil and gas platforms dominate the production of these resources.
However, these platforms face an inherent challenge: decommissioning. Estimated to cost up to $100 billion between 2021 and 2030, decommissioning is a complex task involving significant environmental, social, and economic risks.
In addition to this, and driven by the global effort to reduce emissions, another key factor propels our team, Brazil's offshore wind potential, which reaches 700 gigawatts in locations with depths of up to 50 meters.
Although transforming decommissioned oil platforms is not new, the complexity of modeling this process is substantial. Recognizing these challenges, we saw an opportunity to enhance the decision-making process in the oil and gas sector by developing an interactive, sustainability-based tool.
Our tool is designed to empower decision makers by allowing them to assign weights to variables related to wind potential, economic factors, environmental impact, and platform characteristics. Furthermore, users can freely select which sub-variables will be included in the model.
This tool enables companies and governments to study scenarios and obtain key data curated for the projects they wish to develop. It provides full control over all data and variables.
The primary output of the application is a ranking of platforms that best fit the user's specified criteria, offering a practical and strategic solution to repurpose decommissioned or underutilized oil platforms, transforming them into assets for clean energy generation. This ensures that the users make informed, data-driven decisions, minimizing risks and optimizing resource use in an environment where quick and efficient decision-making is crucial.
Beyond the practical advantages, our project aims to contribute to the decarbonization commitments of economies, as the reuse of these structures also allows for the growth of macroalgae, promoting environmental benefits such as blue carbon generation, aiding in bioremediation and water purification, in addition to the possibility of increasing the production of green hydrogen, ammonia, or green methanol.
We want to contribute to the stability and security of energy supply, considering the sustainability tripod, promoting a circular economy, and protecting fauna and flora. We are committed to developing a tool that not only supports the transition to renewable energies, but also promotes a more sustainable economy and a healthier planet for future generations.
Here we see the students from Rio. Congratulations once again. Today is a good day for celebration, I would argue. Huh?
I believe we have a spokesperson from the team who will say just 1 minute or two, a few words.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good afternoon. I'm very grateful to be here today representing my team from PUC-Rio. This is the third time that our lab, Forecasting and Resource Optimization Group, has participated in this incredible competition, and having the chance to speak to you now as winners is a truly special moment. FROG was founded in 2022 with the goal of bringing students together to participate in the first edition of this competition. And from the very first start, we believe in the program's potential to make a real impact. And to see that today, 3 years later, we alongside with NEMA, Integrated Environmental Center, have won this prize show how much we've grown and matured throughout this journey. This recognition reflects the hard work, persistence, and innovation that have driven our lab forward. We are incredibly excited to start putting our projects into actions. We've learned so much from every mentor, every jury member, every feedback, and participants along the way. I think that everyone who takes part in this competition understands how important our efforts are to address global challenges. This prize not only recognizes our teamwork, but also calls on everyone to continue being agents of change, commitment to finding innovative solutions that support the Sustainable Development Goals to create a fair, a safe, and a smart world. Lastly, I would like to thank and congratulate Siemens Gamesa, SDSN, and all those involved in organizing this event for encouraging students' commitment to sustainability worldwide. The world needs more initiatives like this. I also want to congratulate the others teams for making it so far. Keep pushing forward on your journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and once again, congratulations. And I think we're going to take a picture. Okay, so we continue with the youth session, and we've heard extraordinary speakers throughout the last 2 days, but I think I'm going to welcome to the stage probably my 3 favorite people in this conference, and I'm sure they're going to become yours very soon. Absolutely inspirational SDSN youth leads. They're going to be presenting on the work of SDSN, but also asking some of the questions that are very much connected with the discussions that have been taking place at the UN related to the Pact of the Future. So please join me in the stage. Mr. Phil Eke Okocha, Ms. Yingyi Tong, and Ms. Sanjana Chantal. So I believe I'm just going to let you take it off from here and walk us through your work. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for this amazing opportunity to be here. I was hoping to walk into a packed room, but thank you for staying. Over the course of the past few days, we've had to address so many pressing issues, from climate change to the need to restructure the current financing infrastructure and the role of the current multilateral system, and most interestingly, the session we had not too long ago on education. But as the saying goes, save the best for last. So we're going to end this with youth, the role of youth, and what the work SDSN Youth has been doing for the past few years. So to kick off our session, I'll start by asking a very important question. What does it mean to be a young person in today's world? Have you ever taken your time to ask that question? But I'll give you a brief answer to that. I think one of the problems is, tokenism, and young people every time having to prove time after time that they deserve to be in spaces that are meant for them, and young people having to negotiate access to spaces that are meant for them. And a lot of us here are in New York for several reasons, but a lot of people are here primarily for the big topic that has been on everyone's lips for the past 1 year, which is the Summit of the Future. And it is no surprise that one key element of the Summit of the Future is youth and the future generation. All right, I think my hands are a bit soft. But yes, that is one of the key themes of this year's Summit of the Future. There's a lot of discussion as to, the role of young people. Right from when I was a kid, we've been saying that young people are the future. Young people have the power to make change. But we have the opportunity and we have the chance to ask ourselves important questions. How can we uplift young people? How can we collaborate with young people to actually see those changes and for us to be able to implement sustainable solutions? And one of the ways, and the most simple answer, is meaningful engagement. Engaging with young people can bring about inclusive and innovative solutions that address some of the most pressing issues that we face in the world today. There are so many solutions out there. There are so many organizations, but today I'll talk about one that is very dear to my heart, which is SDSN Youth. For the past 10 years, SDSN Youth has grown into one of the largest network of young people working towards sustainable development. SDSN Youth is the youth initiative of SDSN, and its focus is on empowering and mobilizing young people for the SDGs. And the question then is, what is our mission? The mission of SDSN is to mobilize people towards the sustainable development goals. And I guess you might wonder, where have I heard that? Well, that is also the core of the Summit of the Future. How can we stir conversation? How can we stir young people? How can we stir different initiatives into ensuring for future generations, not only young people now, but for generations to come? Our work is centered on two main areas: on creating programs that enable young people to implement solutions, and secondly, on creating a network that helps in the implementation of these solutions. By empowering and fostering our sustainable collaboration and a global community, we aim to drive meaningful engagement and an opportunity for young people in any part of the world to be able to come up with sustainable solutions to some of the pressing issues within their communities. And our mission is driven by our vision. And our vision is to create an ecosystem, is to create a place where young people can be able to collectively contribute to sustainable development. And what is our why? It is no news that this is the biggest generation of young people we've ever seen. Okay, I think it's moving on its own, so let's take you back. Yes, back to what is our why. This is the largest generation of young people, and we believe in the capabilities and the strength of young people to implement solutions. In cities, it's estimated that in the next few years, up to 80% of our cities will be made up of young people. And these are some of the things that drive our work. And we hope to see more young people engaged in sustainable development and policies. Again, I don't know why it's moving faster than me. So our core values, what are our core values? Our work is driven by three essential core values, that of inclusivity, collaboration, and innovation. We embrace diverse voices, and we try to create a platform where young people, regardless of where they come from, their ideas, are able to have a seat at the table and an opportunity for them to contribute towards the move for sustainable development. Collaboration, leveraging our partners at the UN, academia, nonprofits to provide necessary resources for young people to be able to engage and for young people to be able to contribute in shaping their world. And lastly, innovation. It's been said over 1 million times that young people are innovative, young people are resilient, young people have what it takes. But at SDSN Youth, we listen. No idea is too small, no idea is too big. So we create a safe space and an opportunity for young people who are willing to act now for them to be able to implement their solutions. All right, Jingy.
Thank you, Phil. So how do we do this?
Jingy, the mic.
Oh, sorry, just take the mic. Right, so, oops. Okay. Oh. Change to where we start. Yep.
Thank you. No, sorry. All right. Just say when you're. We're just going through all the slides of today. Yeah.
So how do I do this? Our approach is to, our approach, our approach is to provide inclusive programs that everyone has the opportunity to contribute to sustainable development goals, and in a way that they like and resonate the most. So we have several initiatives. Yes, we have several initiatives. Let's go back to the slides here. So yes, we have several initiatives for all youth to take part in, and these initiatives, in my mind, are the Youth Global Networks, the Youth Solution Program, Local Pathway Fellowship, and the SDG Student Program. Plus, last we have the Youth Solution Program. Okay. Right. Okay. So today we will be covering some of them, so you will get an understanding of what our program would look like in reality. The first program we will be covering today is Global Youth Networks. The Global Youth Networks serves as the youth branch, definitely, and the supportive structure of the SDSN networks. So as of this year, 2022, we have 14 active youth networks across the globe with 48 countries involved and with over 5,000 young people impacted. At our core value, or let's say core area focused, the first one is collaboration. At SDSN Youth, our global youth networks, the responsibility of us is to further integrate the regional and national networks into SDSN youth programming, as well as fostering and enabling collaboration in the regions. The second one is localization. Yes, so localization of our efforts is a key. We aim to continuously bring youth at the forefront of all of our activities at local, regional, and international level. Right, so thirdly, it is the education and awareness. We work now actively to raise awareness and provide capacity building activities to young people across the world. So that's exactly what SDSN Youth is really good at and is working hard to achieve. Next one is mobilization, right? So as the Global Youth Networks, we mobilize young people to achieve SDGs, and definitely we support them, empower them to give them the necessary resources, skills, and tools to help them lead and achieve their individual localized solution. Next page, please. Right, so here I'm gonna share with you some case studies that the Global Youth Networks have been working really hard on. The first one is Youth Consulting Summit. So could you please go back? Yes. Right, so these events consist of several very interesting agenda, including competitions on national scales, bringing the idea of ESGs, SDGs implementation to use in Indonesia. So the main events was conducted in July this year in Jakarta, and over 60 registrations participate. And the next one is the Climate Action Actor Accelerator Program. So this program is actually a great opportunity to provide young change makers and innovators to fight against the climate crisis. And this knowledge sharing and innovation program actually kick off in 2022 in Nigeria, and for the first cohort, we have over 500 people get involved, and the 23 cohort last year, we managed to support over 700 Nigerian youth to achieve the SDGs. Last one is the food security workshop. Yes, so the food security workshop is actually an event called Navigating Food Security in Crisis, in times of crisis in Mediterranean and the Black Sea region, right? So this event was co-organized by SDSN Youth Mediterranean networks, and we successfully involved over 19 participants in this site event. So it's actually a great success when it comes to youth-led initiative. Right, next. Okay, here you go.
All right. How many of us here came here using public transport? How many of us here walk our dogs to the park? Or would like to walk our dogs to the park? Great. How many of us here complain about our house? It's something we don't like about the structure, stuff like that. Okay. How many of us would prefer to see more green spaces? How many of us have questions about the waste management system? All right, thank you. Well, these and many more are some of the questions that through the Local Pathways Fellowship we aim to address. The Local Pathways Fellowship is one of the flagship programs of SDSN Youth, and the focus is on SDG 11. This program started in 2018, and the focus of this program is working with young people to come up with solutions to the pressing issues within their city. So we work with young people, empowering them, giving them the resources to find local pathways to sustainable future, coming up with local solutions. Since the start of this program, the network has grown to over 660 young people spread in 85 countries across 285 cities. Last year, we were able to welcome new countries for the first time. Fellows from Samoa, fellows from Fiji, in areas that we've not been able to reach in the past. So this somehow explains the reach of the program and the impact the program has had over time. And how do we do this at the Local Pathways Fellowship? We have a simple methodology, but we approach it different ways. And just as was discussed in the last panel, and the question we ask ourselves every time is, what is the purpose of education? What is the purpose of schools? How can we translate these big words, the SDGs, and the words that we hear every single time? Like, young people are tired of hearing empowerment, capacity building. How do we translate it into reality? And through our methodology, such as capacity building, we have a design module where we help and we work with the fellows to understand the basics and work up there and build capacity for them to be able to, at the end of their time, be able to implement their solutions in their cities. We have a mentorship program, which we started a while back, where we have former fellows of the program stay back in the system and mentor current fellows. So that way we have some certain level of continuity, and we also kind of keep the knowledge. And recently we also opened it up to practitioners in the field, people working in the field, to be able to have dialogue with our fellows. So please, if you're one of them, we would love to welcome you as one of our mentors as well. And also consultation with experts. As part of our program methodology, we have monthly webinars where we invite people to come and speak with the fellows, share their real-world experience. And oftentimes we've seen collaboration between the fellows and some of the speakers and some of the experts we engage with. And lastly, nurturing community. As one of our partners would say, building a league of change makers. And that's one of the things we try to do. So some of these experts, facilitators, mentors, we've sort of created a community whereby we're able to engage and we're able to continue the work that we do, which is finding ways to build sustainable cities, and not just for us, but for future generations. Next. So there are a lot of case studies, and there's a lot of, there's a lot of positives that have come out of this program. Yesterday at one of our events, I met a 2019 fellow of the program, William Chan, who is the youngest elected city councillor in Sydney, Australia. And to quote, he said that the program got him thinking about sustainability, thinking about governance, and how to make his city better. And that was what prompted him to run for office. We also have on the screen, you can see Leticia from Brazil. She created a project to help map safe spaces for women. And this provided an opportunity for her to get appointed into her local government as a gender mobility specialist. And now she's a political advisor on gender mobility in Belo Horizonte in Brazil. We also have another fellow, Mohammed from Pakistan, who became the youngest selected member of the International Well-Built Institute advisory role. And we have so many of them, and we have one of them here as well, who his work was able to provide him an opportunity to get into the UNFCCC, and he has done extensive work on the Loss and Damage Fund. These and many more are some testimonies of the impact of the program, the reach of the program, and as has been said in the previous panel, and as we listened to the last video, of the impact and the power that young people have. When young people are provided the resources, when they are provided the right atmosphere, when they are supported, they're heard and listened to, and when there's a system to help them refine and to co-create solutions together, we can see the result. So now I'll pass over to my colleague. Thank you.
So before I begin, I request everyone to pause and look around the room. Everything that you see was once an idea. An idea is a powerful tool that shapes communities, inspires movements, and changes people's lives. It transcends communities and generations. Yesterday, one of the topics of discussion was about the best-case scenario, utopia. Imagine what would happen if families, communities, schools, and organizations nurtured the innate curiosities of young people and encouraged ideas and innovation. In a world where crisis is a constant, ideas bring much needed hope that we can and should change the world for the better for everyone. Through the Youth Solutions Program, we are nurturing and supporting the ideas and innovations of adolescent and young entrepreneurs from the age of 12 to 35. These young change makers want to address problems at the grassroots level. They have ideas and they have the determination to make that idea into reality. And we are helping them do that through curated training, one-to-one mentorship, connection to different stakeholders, and also connection to seed grants. These people are not waiting for change. They are creating change. We had a venture last year that had reached over 20,000 farmers, and they were designing agricultural equipment for women farmers. Globally, the agricultural ecosystem is dependent on the women farmers, but right now, what is happening is that the agricultural equipment is not designed for them, and these young change makers are making that change. We had another venture that was recycling over 100 tons of waste per month, and we were also introducing the concepts of social entrepreneurship to young entrepreneurs. And one of the ideas that the middle and high school students had was designing glasses that would convert real-time voices into subtitles. So one thing that the change makers across our program have in common is they do not want to leave anyone behind. They are designing solutions for everyone. And it's often said that youths are the future. But the young entrepreneurs in our programs have proven time and again that they are not the future, they are the present. They are changing the present, and by doing that, they're changing the future as well. Despite the waves that young people are creating in the ecosystem, their potential remains untapped. Because of systemic barriers, we are unable to harness their potential, which kind of undermines the systems change potential that would be created if we were able to meaningfully engage young people. There is a lack of youth lens in the overall ecosystem. And if you look at the programs and policies in broad, they are designed with a more traditional entrepreneur in mind, and they are not taking into account the unique challenges faced by young entrepreneurs. And this is because young entrepreneurs are often viewed as beneficiaries and not as important stakeholders. And this comes from the perception that their young age is a weakness and not a strength. People fail to recognize the idea, innovation potential that the young people have, and their lived experience, the local contextualized information that they have, is not viewed as expertise. So what is expertise and who gets to define that are questions that we need to ask as the ecosystem stakeholders. And because of that, what happens is there's a power imbalance, right? Young people seldom get access to meet other key stakeholders in the ecosystem, and even if they do, there is a power imbalance in the room, where they might be present in the room, but they do not have a real voice to influence the decisions, and their interests remain underrepresented in important discussions. The overall lack of the youth lens creates a resource gap, an information gap in the ecosystem that undermines the potential of the youth-led innovations. And in addition to that, the young entrepreneurs also have limited access to other key stakeholders. If you were to look at the supply chain, right, there are suppliers, customers, there are other stakeholders who also undermine potential of young entrepreneurs, and that creates disruptions in their businesses. There's also power imbalance where the young entrepreneurs are left with terms that are not favorable for them. So we have an ecosystem that is not working for young entrepreneurs. The lack of funding is a big problem that is being faced by young innovators across the board. If we look at the traditional finance, right, what do we need? We need collateral, we need the credit history. How many 20 or 25-year-old do you know who owns a land, who has a house to their name, or who has a rich credit history? The traditional finance, it was not designed with a youth lens, and that is creating problems for our young change makers. We need a youth lens. There is very limited financial resources tailored for young people in the ecosystem, and that has created a situation where young people must compete with each other for limited resources. Partnerships for goals is important, but we have young people competing for limited resources. So what kind of message are we sending to young people through how we have designed our ecosystem? I've met several young change makers who have a full-time job, and they are running their ventures on the side because they're earning salaries to feed into their entrepreneurial ventures. When we talk about young people, we often talk about the energy that the young people have, right? But we should also talk about exhaustion that they're experiencing because the ecosystem is not designed for them. They have to do so much more with so little, and instead of saying that it's inspiring, we need to change the ecosystem, right? The youth lens is the need of the hour, and we need to create a utopia, a best-case scenario where young people are succeeding because of the ecosystem and not despite the ecosystem.
Okay, it's time to look ahead. So we are now approaching 2030 very soon. Think about the future. What are the solutions we want to create and to shape the world? And at SDSN Youth, think about the future. We have some solutions in mind for the summit of the future and the beyond years after. So the first one, let me stand here, much easier. Right, so the first one is enhance and scale up the flagship programs. We have several programs, right? So these flagship programs are the core heart of SDSNUs. So in order for us to be able to further mobilize young people, the first thing for us to do is to scale up and enhance the flagship program, no matter it is the funding opportunities to support these youth-led initiatives or operational-wise, right? So this is the first thing we aim to do. And the second thing is ensure diversity and inclusion. We always say we want to leave no one behind, but we haven't done much, to be honest. So for the future years to come, the second or one of the most priorities is to ensure the minorities and the underrepresented communities that also have the seats in the global policy and also the decision-making processes. It is very important to ensure that youth voice are heard and our representation are seen. Okay, next one is embracing technology and digital tools. So I do want to divide this into two parts. The first one is how we operate youth-led organization or initiatives. One key element or aspect we could consider is to embrace technology. Now we are at the forefront of digitalization. So we need to have this kind of mindset to incorporate digital tools, technologies, and some high-tech the hard-rich tax to our operations. In this way, we will be able to streamline our operations and make the whole organization more efficiency. Okay, next one is we work with youth. So it's important to empower young people with necessary skills. When we are talking about skills, digital tools, digital literacy is a key part. So moving forward, we need to shift our focus to help young people understand, propel them for the future employment opportunities. So they will be able to use digital tools and technologies in their daily life. Next one is cultivated data-driven culture. This is critical in my point of view, because if we cannot use data, if we don't use a data-driven approach to make decisions, so it means we won't be able to know what we are now, right? So are we on the right track, and are we heading to the right future we are expecting, right? So to be next, yes. So for us to embrace a data-driven culture, one of the key things we need to do at the organizational level is to build a result-based monitoring, evaluation, and learning system. This is critical. This is actually a management approach tools that the whole United Nations system is currently implementing. So this is something we need to really think about and implement in our own youth-led organizations. Next page. Right, so continue facilitating community capacity building. Right, when it comes to capacity building, we haven't done enough. So we, as the youth networks and at SDSNUs, we need to keep push resources and expertise, no matter from our partners or from our youth fellows, to provide more capacity buildings to young people who really need them. Next one is advocacy and stakeholder collaborations. We always talk about stakeholder collaborations because no one can achieve sustainable development on our own, right? We have to create an ecosystem, like Sanjana said, and we need public sectors, we need private sectors, international organizations, governments to work together to achieve sustainable development. So no matter it comes to multilateralism or it is intergenerational conversations. All of these efforts should be accelerated and should be mentioned again and again in the process of this transformational journey. Next one is develop and advocate, yes, for the effective financial strategy. We cannot run a program sustainably if we don't have enough fundings. So it is the obstacle we always face as a young person, as a youth-led initiative, short of fundings all the time. So as we move forward, right, no matter it is innovative financial models like other guest has mentioned, or the financial strategies within organizations, it is critical for us to think about how we can just mobilize more resources internally and externally using some innovative and holistic method. Okay, last one, reimagine the role of future generations in the post-world of 2030, right? So again, youth will always be seen as beneficiaries of all the changes made, but we are actually the change agent ourselves. We're not waiting for the future to come. We're actually working so hard to influence and to shape the future ourselves now. Right, so the role of future generations are guessing the same. We're just passing the torch to the next generations, working hard now and achieve SDGs, and believe the next generations could have the same faith and take the same, have the same passion for creating a better world for the future. There's some trust we need to build not only for the future generations, but for the older people, the intergenerational conversation and thought should be integrated in the whole system. Thank you.
To take it from where, to continue from where my colleague Jingi stopped, I think the question that everyone is asking and everyone is still asking is, what is the world post-2030 going to look like? When I got into the SDGs, I didn't know about the MDGs, so that's how young I am. So I don't know, post-2030, we're going to have TMG, transformative goals, but it's something for us to start thinking about. We didn't plan for the pandemic. It's something we heard in stories, the Spanish flu and things of that nature. We didn't know that AI was going to come out, we know it was going to come out, we didn't know it was going to come out this fast. There are so many, and their reach is far. And with the panels we've heard yesterday and today, global conflicts springing up in different parts of the world. And who are at the center of it all? Young people. So the question then is no longer why youth, but why not youth? Why don't we have young people be part of that conversation? Every single time after time, we've heard it over and over again, that young people, that there should be a role for young people, but we need to go beyond words. Each and every one of us have a role to play. We need to go beyond words. Meaningful engagement, what does that mean? Active listening. Actively engaging with young people. There's as I mentioned earlier in the start of my presentation, there are so many youth initiatives out there looking for people, organizations to work with and to collaborate with. And SDSN Youth is one of them. We've heard so many solutions that have come out of the different programs, and so many more initiatives that we're not going to be able to cover within this space of time. And we're looking for people who are willing, organizations that are willing to help us bridge the gap. As my colleague has mentioned, finance. Finance is always one of the big issues. Other than that, young people face a lot of issues even when they've gone over that barrier and are in the process of implementing their solutions. So at this stage we are in the world right now with all the issues, the question is, why not youth? Why not youth? Okay.
Very good. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Of course, you are demonstrating we're doing it together, and we're counting on you for next year. We're going to have a full day of the youth programs and the real accomplishments that you're going to have during the coming year. So we've already reserved the day for you, the room for you, and we're looking forward to the great accomplishments of SDSN Youth. So please thank everybody for thank you for wonderful work. We also have a date, as you know, at the Vatican next spring. We have every year a Vatican Youth Summit, and Pope Francis has participated in this summit, and we have a plan for the Vatican Youth Summit next spring. So please, if you have specific ideas or projects or thoughts about how to support SDSN Youth, let us know, and of course we will transmit all of that support right away. We're at the end of a long 2 days, and another 2 days is about to start at the United Nations tomorrow and the next day. The latest news that I have is only from this morning, but I was told that there is basically an agreement on the Pact for the Future and the 2 annexes. This is very wonderful news. It's not easy to get a global agreement these days. And I read through the agreement. It was quite close to what we had seen in public, but better. It hadn't been watered down, actually. It had been strengthened, in fact, in the last week. And I like it very much, what was said, because it starts out by pointing out the path downward if we continue doing what we're doing, and the enormous potential for solutions if we choose to take them. This is the odd reality of our time, and it is really our reality in SDSN and in the world and in each of the places you're coming from. There are so many wonderful things happening. What we heard from the Minister of Education of Ghana is an example of, wow, didn't quite know that. And I think if you look almost anywhere, you can find wonderful things. Last week when Sonia and I were in Mexico City meeting with the incoming government, we learned a tremendous number of very positive things that are not really well known about the significant decline of poverty rates, about the mobilization of information technology in recent years in Mexico, despite COVID and despite all the ups and downs. We had a fantastic panel on energy this morning. Believe me, there are solutions at scale, and our Chinese colleagues think at scale. And they're solving problems at scale. And this is extraordinarily heartening. I was very pleased at how pleased all of you were in your faces listening to the philosophers. That was fun and invigorating and inspiring, and also something that we need to think about to bring to some others who could use a little philosophy. Our national security advisors, our diplomats, our political leaders who aren't thinking the right way often, and they need this kind of approach. So we've had a wonderful 2 days. I'm not going to belabor us with details because I'm too tired to do so, frankly. And I don't think we need a wrap-up except to say that when we go through our voluminous notes of the last 2 days, there are 1,000 leads to pursue. We will pursue them. I think the main call that I feel from the Secretary General and from the Deputy Secretary General is that we need to run even faster in the coming year. We're going to have a document with lots of pledges 2 days from now, lots of things that are going to be done. We're good at taking those lists and monitoring them and actually helping to implement them. And many of the items on the list, I'm proud to say, are ideas that we've been promoting, ways forward that we've been promoting, and with an action plan that is absolutely within reach. So let me just take the opportunity to close our 2 days session to thank everybody for great participation and great attention. And it's long. For a job, I sit through long meetings, but you honor us by doing so in the last 2 days, not only sitting through them, but participating actively, generating ideas, making contacts. This is a family, as you can see, SDSN family. You don't get out of it like a family. It's your family now, if it wasn't before. And so we count on you for the full participation and partnership and brainstorming and ideas and actions and especially solutions on the way forward. Thank you all very much.